I'm your host, Donnie Wahlberg. From ID, this is Very Scary People, the Ken and Barbie killers. Just a heads up before we begin. This episode contains references to sexual violence and abuse. Listen with care. It's the summer of 1991, and on the shores of Lake Ontario, love is in the air. Over 100 people are gathering in Niagara-on-the-Lake. It's a tranquil, waterfront town surrounded by sprawling fruit orchards and vineyards. One of Canada's most beautiful places to visit. The town is a charming and pristinely preserved 19th century village, not far from the city of St. Catharines. Friends and family have come together to witness the wedding of Karla Homolka and Paul Bernardo.
They both had wonderful futures. They were gorgeous.
The blonde-haired, blue-eyed pair had their whole lives ahead of them. They were young and fiercely in love. Karla, the bride-to-be, was 21 years old on their wedding day, and Paul was 26. She was an animal lover with ambitions of becoming a vet. He was a business-savvy numbers guy and worked as an accountant. Karla grew up in St. Catharines, and Paul was from the neighboring town of Scarborough. That's where they first met.
It was love at first sight when she met Paul Bernardo.
They're a match made in heaven, and the wedding is something out of a fairy tale.
It seemed like they were the perfect couple, the Ken and Barbie, the dream marriage.
And just like out of the make-believe Barbie world, everything was staged perfectly. A place where Ken and Barbie can have anything they want and be anyone they want to be. And on their wedding day, Karla's dress was fit for a princess. A white wedding gown with a tightly fitted top with puffy sleeves and skirt. Her veil was peppered with baby's breath. Her 6 bridesmaids looked flawless too. All of them donned peach-colored dresses with sleeves that puffed up to their ears. And Paul wore a tuxedo with a white bow tie that distinguished him from his 5 groomsmen. Karla and Paul were married by a priest. The ceremony took place in one of Niagara-on-the-Lake's historic churches. They pulled out all the stops.
Look at their wedding. They got married in a Cinderella-like carriage, and they had pheasant. And this was no cheap wedding. I mean, they really paid quite a bit of money. People were in tuxedos. They really played the part of that upper scale couple.
Karla had been dreaming of a lavish wedding her whole life.
Karla says, I'm going to have this big wedding. I'm going to have the horse and carriage. I'm going to have the big engagement ring. I'm going to have it all.
And for a husband just like Paul, handsome and accomplished, a guy she could take home to mom and dad.
Part of the reason why Homolka's parents really liked Paul Bernardo is because he had a successful career.
She felt like she hit the jackpot, and her friends thought so too.
One of her friends said, you're the luckiest person in the world. He's such a great find. You're so lucky.
The feeling was mutual. It was clear to wedding guests that Karla was also the apple of Paul's eye. Paul was always seen with his signature accessory.
Paul Bernardo, never was without a video camera in his hand, because that was one of the cool things to have in, the late 80s, early 90s was a video camera.
And they certainly weren't cheap. Owning your own video camera was a status symbol. There's this home video. Paul has the camera focused on Karla. She's in a baggy t-shirt, smiling and blushing as she plops down on her bed, waving her feet in the air.
There she is, ladies and gentlemen, the sexiest girl in the world.
Paul recorded everything, including every moment of their wedding.
It was, speeches from Paul that, indicated he had found the love of his life.
And the home videos from the big day documented I do's as they looked into one another's eyes.
I, Paul, thank you, Karla. Be my wife.
They were destined for one another, it just seemed.
But while a dream was coming true at the extravagant wedding at Niagara-on-the-Lake, just miles away, a nightmare was unfolding on the shore of a neighboring lake.
14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey went missing on June 15th. 2 weeks later, her dismembered body parts were found encased in concrete in Lake Gibson.
Leslie was last seen on the evening of June 14th in her hometown of Burlington, Ontario. She was a 9th grader at M.M. Robinson High School.
She's 14 years old, blonde, young, vivacious.
Leslie Mahaffey was, by all means, an average girl who was going kind of through a slightly rebellious phase. So she was, sneaking out of the house and smoking cigarettes. Typical behavior of girls that age.
And hours before she vanished,
Leslie had gone to a funeral home to say goodbye to a friend who had been killed in a car crash with 3 other teens.
after spending the night with friends, the night she disappeared, she had arrived home around 2 a.m. But when she got to the front door, it was locked. She called a friend and asked to spend the night. Her friend said she couldn't, and that was the last anyone had heard from her. 2 weeks later, her body was discovered by 2 fishermen not far from St. Catharines, where Paul and Karla called home.
On the day that Karla Homolka and Paul Bernardo get married, that's the day they discover Leslie Mahaffey's body.
The 2 scenes taking place on June 29th, 1991, couldn't be more different. But could they be connected? And was there more to the perfect pairing of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka than met the eye?
The overarching story is the fact that they looked like normal people. They were blonde and pretty and good-looking. How could they be so sadistic and evil?
In this season, we're traveling to Canada, a place known for its cold beer and warm welcomes, to trace the twisted path of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, a couple from Toronto that appeared loving and wholesome. The truth is, they were anything but. We'll explore how the boy and the girl next door became the killers known as Ken and Barbie. This is episode 1, Blonde Hair, Blue Eyes. When you think of Canada, crime usually isn't the first thing that comes to mind. Hockey and maple syrup maybe, but not murder. Today, it remains uncommon to hear of violent crime in Canada, even in Toronto, its most populous city. Toronto is the capital city of the province of Ontario. Its skyline boasts views of Lake Ontario, a body of water that shares its shores with New York State. The city is divided into 4 districts. One of them, Scarborough, is where the story begins. Much of Scarborough looks like your typical middle-class suburbia. Tree-lined streets, single-standing homes, strip malls, and family-friendly businesses. And like most Canadian towns, Scarborough has maintained a rep for being a safe place to live. John Rosen has dedicated his career to be a defense attorney, and he understands Canada's history with crime.
So, unlike the United States, Canada is a pretty safe country. For example, the city of Toronto, if we have 70 or 80 murders for a population of whatever it is, 2-point-some million, that's high. And all of the towns and cities that surround it, although it varies from place to place, are lower.
In the 80s, Eastern Toronto fell into the lower crime rate category.
The fact of the matter is that Toronto, St. Catharines, the borough of Scarborough, they're relatively safe places. And you could pretty well go anywhere in this city without being concerned.
This was a place where you lived in peace and comfort and safety.
That was until 1987, when Scarborough felt anything but safe.
Police have been tracking the movement of this serial rapist. The man has targeted young women walking alone at night at various locations throughout Scarborough.
A serial rapist was at large, with no signs of stopping. His victim toll kept climbing. His first known attack was May 4th, 1987, and his second attack was just 10 days later. Nick Prawn covered the police beat at the Toronto Star when the rape started. He remembers women in their early teens to 20s being targeted.
Women were walking home late at night or getting off a bus late at night, either coming home from work or seeing friends, and they were getting attacked.
His victims were being grabbed from behind and dragged into bushes and driveways. Some victims were left badly injured.
He stomped on her, her forearm and broke it. And another victim, it was her upper thigh or lower leg that he stomped on and broke that.
He would brutally beat them before ultimately raping them. He threatened to kill them and even told some that he had been stalking them prior to attacking them. It wasn't uncommon for him to make off with the victim's personal item, jewelry, identification, or clothing.
He tied one woman's hand to the fence, and then he kept her panties as a souvenir.
Local law enforcement established its own task force, dubbed by the media as the Scarborough Rape Task Force, and later known as the Sexual Assault Squad. They began pouring resources into finding the man residents were calling the Scarborough Rapist.
Metropolitan Toronto Police are intensifying their hunt for the man dubbed the Scarborough Rapist. Late Wednesday night, the man attacked what appears to have become his sixth victim.
Paul Hunter vividly remembers how community members in Scarborough felt at the time.
Nobody knew when it was going to happen next, how many people were going to get raped, and all anyone was thinking was, what is going on here? This doesn't happen here, right? Scarborough was baby boom suburbia. It was plazas and bowling alleys, and I don't think they had white picket fences, but it was that kind of place. And all of a sudden, there was this terror every night that someone was going to get raped.
The collective fear in Scarborough was palpable, and only intensifying as police searched for leads to no avail. Local women felt vulnerable and exposed to the increasingly plausible threat of being his next victim.
This was a place of safety, of refuge from everywhere else. And that's what was so, I think, kind of stunning about the rapes. Because it was happening in Scarborough, and it was happening again and again and again and again. And police seemed unable to do anything about it. Women did not want to walk home from the bus stop. Because what if this was their night? And all the rest of us, sat helpless. What can anyone do except be afraid?
Young women across Toronto feared for their safety and their lives, like Kathy Kenzora.
I was in college in Toronto, so I was close enough to where they were happening that it was definitely something that I worried about and my girlfriends worried about.
The threat of being attacked had women rethinking their routines and proactively adjusting the seemingly normal parts of their daily lives.
I always made a habit of checking even in the back seat of my car to see if there was anyone in the car. And I started leaving my car seat leaned forward because it was a two-door, so that you knew that if your car seat was back, that someone had gotten into the car.
Whether or not they lived in Scarborough, they couldn't help but be affected by the news of a serial rapist operating so close to home.
So it was definitely something that I thought about, my friends thought about, and we heard about. And even though it wasn't directly in our neighborhood, it was close enough. And it permeated the media. Everyone heard about it.
The Scarborough rapist became notorious for attacking his victims without revealing his face. This made the manhunt that much harder. As his victim number increased, more information about his patterns came to light. Amy Schlossberg is a criminology professor at Fairleigh Dickinson University and co-host of Women in Crime podcast. She studies crime patterns and remembers closely looking at the details surrounding the case.
So several young women were being raped in the area of Scarborough. And most of these rapes were occurring in open public areas, such as bus terminal, bus stops, the front yard of someone's home, the backyard of someone's home. There was one occasion where the Scarborough rapist did break into someone's home and tried to assault them in their bedroom, but that was interrupted by the victim's mother.
With limited identifying information, law enforcement had to make do with other details and observations to build out his profile.
We're doing the best we can. Hopefully, somebody has an idea who he is.
This is Greg McCrary. He's a retired FBI agent now. But back then, he was working on a behavioral science unit when suddenly his focus changed. He was brought to Toronto to investigate the Scarborough case.
There were different theories when we came up there. One of the theories was that because these victims, many of them had come from downtown or had passed through downtown Toronto on the way home, that he may be selecting the victims downtown and jumping on a bus with them and following them to Scarborough and then getting off and raping them there.
As the task force looked closer into the theory that the Scarborough rapist was only passing through, a different possibility emerged. A possibility that was far more terrifying. He might be a local, compounding the fear and panic already being felt in Scarborough.
If he was getting victims downtown and following them, we would expect a wider dispersion of rapes in different suburbs and different areas and even parts of Toronto. That didn't happen. This was his hunting ground.
But there was something the Scarborough rapist consistently did that truly convinced FBI agents that he was local.
Now, the other thing with the verbal behavior that also was another indication that he lived in the area was his demand that they not look at him. Keep their head down, keep your eyes closed, don't look, don't look, don't look.
It seemed he was desperate to keep his identity hidden. And while he wasn't known to show his face, a general description of his age and appearance was cobbled together by what his victims could remember.
We put his age between 18 and 25.
Initially, it was thought that he was around the same age as his victims. But that wasn't really adding as investigators looked further.
When you look at the demographics of the area, we felt he had to be living in a financially dependent situation. Nobody in their late teens or early 20s could afford one of these homes in Scarborough. Just is not going to happen.
There just really wasn't a lot to go off.
A white male, young, kind of blonde or brown, light brown hair, no accent, nothing that would indicate anything other than kind of being native to the area. Medium build, fairly strong, fit guy.
It was disappointing. The police had a general idea of his demographic and the territory he moved in, and still, it seemed the serial rapist was hiding in plain sight. Jim Van Allen is a retired profiler for the Ontario Provincial Police. He worked on the case in an effort to identify the Scarborough rapist by drawing on knowledge from experience working on cases with similar perpetrators. Profilers like Jim know what makes criminals tick and how to assess the probability of them striking again. He had his theories about the mind and method of a serial rapist.
They often have this relational quality to them where they are the master and the victim is the slave. Or they are the captor and the victim is the captive.
And they often lead double lives, making them even harder to track down.
They can appear like a pillar of the community or a normal individual or functioning couple in the community to people that know them superficially. But this is one of the worst scenarios for a community to experience and for police service to attempt to solve because of the predatory nature of the crime, needle in a haystack, difficulty in identifying the individual.
While theories and descriptions of the Scarborough rapist were rising to the surface, law enforcement weren't solving the problem. He still hadn't been caught. Here's Nick again.
I mean, they put together a 50-member task force, but what do police do in this? They round up the usual suspects, guys who have sex assault charges, and they look at all these people.
But women were still being viciously attacked.
They couldn't seem to stop this. And all the women he attacked was from behind. And what he would do, he would put a knife to their throat and said, if you look at me, I'll slit your throat.
Frustration and concern with the state of the investigation was mounting in Scarborough and surrounding districts. If he was right under their noses, how could it be so hard to find the guy?
I think there were groups of people that just went out on their own to try to catch this guy, like civilians. And there was one police officer, he wasn't on the task force, but he worked in the area and he had a family, he had a daughter, and it bothered the hell out of him.
That father wasn't alone. Parents all over Scarborough were up in arms over the state of the investigation, terrified their own daughters would be next if the police didn't catch this guy as soon as possible. But soon, after years of collective frustration, unrelenting attacks, and tireless attempts to track the perpetrator down, a break would finally be caught in the case of the Scarborough rapist. The Scarborough rapist's known victim toll climbed to over a dozen women by 1990. It had been 3 years since his first known attack, and by now, all of Canada knew of him. But although he became infamous across the country for his horrible crimes, still, nobody knew what he looked like yet. Here's Paul Hunter again.
His MO was to go up behind his victims and grab them from behind to make sure they couldn't see him. He made a mistake eventually, and somebody caught a glimpse.
On the evening of May 26, 1990, the Scarborough rapist made his final attack, and a critical, groundbreaking mistake. His 13th victim, a 19-year-old local woman, got a good look at him. It was a quiet, dark night. She was walking home from a bus stop when she saw a man walking towards her.
He stopped to chat to the lady, and he's very charming, and she felt a little bit at ease, I guess, and he started walking with her. And then they got to a dark alley. Then he attacked her and raped her, but she was able to see his face.
Previously on Very Scary People, the Ken and Barbie killers. The picture-perfect couple, Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, said "I do" at their lavish wedding on the shores of Lake Ontario, Canada. That same day, on the neighboring Lake Gibson, the dismembered body of a missing teenage girl named Leslie Mahaffey was discovered, encased in concrete. And in another district of East Toronto called Scarborough, a serial rapist was on the loose, and his victim survived, but never saw his face. The manhunt for the Scarborough rapist lasted 3 years, but they kept coming up short despite vigilant police efforts, until he slipped up and a victim got a good look at him. This was a major break in the case. From her description, the police were able to draw up a composite sketch. It's May 28, 1990, and the Toronto Metro PD's phone lines are ringing off the hook.
It was 6 years after the first woman was raped in the Scarborough area that the police finally had their big break.
The composite sketch of the Scarborough rapist lands on the front page of the Toronto Sun that morning with the headline, "Have you seen this man?" He's described as having a medium muscular build with no facial hair. In the sketch, his eyes are light blue and his hair is blonde and parted to the left side. He was last seen wearing a baby blue jacket, tan pleated shorts, and running shoes. No socks. Calls are coming in left and right from people claiming to know the identity of the man who turned their town upside down. But there is one name that keeps coming up.
Police received hundreds of tips. Several people had called to say it was Paul Bernardo.
The multiple tips pointing toward Paul Bernardo just couldn't be ignored. So on November 20th, 1990, Metropolitan Toronto Police bring him in for questioning. Paul is cooperative, and he doesn't ask for legal representation.
He was very open. He was very at ease. He wasn't nervous. He did not lawyer up.
He even acknowledges the similarities in the sketch.
He said, "Yeah, it sure looks like me, but it's not me, but it sure as heck looks like me."
He tells the police officers that the sketch and him both have a baby face. After they show him the sketch, police start looking for an alibi. Paul tells police he couldn't exactly remember what he was doing at the time of the attack, but assumed he was likely hanging out with his girlfriend, Karla.
And then they asked him for the DNA stuff, and he gave it to him willingly.
Samples of his hair are taken, but also his blood. Paul is one of the few men brought in for questioning, asked to provide a blood sample. The interview lasts approximately 30 minutes, and the lead into Paul was never followed.
He just didn't seem like, the kind of suspect that would do this.
The thing is, by the time Paul is brought in, the investigation into the Scarborough rapist is winding down. That's because the attack stopped once the rapist's final victim got a good look at his face. Law enforcement shifts their focus.
On the list of suspects they had, like 1,000, his name went right to the bottom. And the DNA sample that they took of him, unfortunately, it wasn't evaluated because he was so low down on the priority list.
Little did they know at the time, their instinct to take Paul's blood wouldn't be in vain.
If you just saw Paul Bernardo in the late 80s or met Paul Bernardo, you would just think he was a fairly handsome young man, blonde hair, blue eyes, looked pretty average, not someone who would be stalking women, attacking women, brutally assaulting them. You would never have thought that if you just saw him.
This wouldn't be Paul's last brush with the law. From ID, this is Very Scary People, the Ken and Barbie killers. I'm your host, Donnie Wahlberg. You might remember me from our first season, the Amityville Murders. And now, in this season, we're traveling to Canada, a place known for its cold beer and warm welcomes, to trace the twisted path of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, a couple from Toronto that appeared loving and wholesome. The truth is, they were anything but. We'll explore how the boy and the girl next door became the killers known as Ken and Barbie. This is episode 2, Call 911. Karla Homolka was the kind of girl who grew up dreaming of her wedding day. After all, she grew up in the 80s, raised by hopelessly romantic John Hughes movies and power ballads like Take My Breath Away. She was a teenager, totally tuned into a culture that was all about the pursuit of love. Kathy Kenzor says it's even how Karla and her friends would spend their time together.
They had what they called the Diamond Club, which was talking about the diamond rings they hoped to get for their engagements. And she was pretty focused on getting a boyfriend and getting married.
Karla imagined her left hand shining in the sun with a huge 2-carat ring on her finger, a ring fit for royalty. Mary Garofalo recalls she had a couple other hopes for her dream guy, too.
She wrote in her yearbook that she was looking for a rich man. This was her only goal in life, that she was going to marry a rich guy.
She had a handful of boyfriends and kissed some frogs before finally finding her prince. Amy Schlossberg remembers just how excited Karla was about finding Paul.
When Karla met Paul Bernardo, she thought her fairy tale was finally coming true.
He was everything she had dreamt up in her Diamond Club days, and she was over the moon.
She has always wanted to, live a life where she was with a husband who made her feel happy, good looking, had money. She really thought this was the start of the life she always wanted.
Kathy Kenzor recalls the night they met in the fall of 1987.
Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka met in a hotel lobby in Scarborough. I believe she was 17, he was 23.
Karla was at the Howard Johnson Hotel on business.
And she was in Scarborough for a pet food convention, of all things, because she worked at a pet store as a teenager. And he and some friends had showed up at the lobby of the hotel late at night to hit the 24-hour restaurant.
That's when the two first locked eyes.
And she came down with one of her friends. I think they were even in their pajamas, just hanging out, being teenagers in the lobby. And the two girls and two guys connected, talked, hit it off, ended up back in Karla's room.
John Rosen says from there, they were all over each other.
It's lust at first sight. They come and sit with the girls and they talk, and the next thing you know is they've all adjourned to the girls' room and they set up pillows on the floor to separate the two areas so that there would be some privacy, and they have sex.
Apparently, this was pretty typical behavior of Paul. But Amy says that night, something was different.
Well, it was known that Paul Bernardo, he had one-night stands quite often. So it was to everyone's surprise where he asked Karla for her information, and he did follow up with her.
It was a special gesture for Karla, too. From that night on, she just knew Paul was the one.
Karla has said that she fell head over heels in love. It was love at first sight when she met Paul Bernardo.
And it wasn't long after meeting in Scarborough that the two made things official. John Rosen says Paul was doing a lot of commuting in those early days.
From that point on, he's dating her, and he's driving in to St. Catharines to see her.
They were in that exciting time when you first start dating, the honeymoon phase. Those early days when that special person is the first thing you think about when you wake up. You want to spend every second together. And when you're not, you're up all night talking on the phone. Young, beautiful, and in full-on puppy love. They were having the time of their lives and documenting all of it on their home video camera.
Come here. Oh, focus in on Karla. Come here. Isn't she beautiful? Come here.
In that home video clip, Karla is seated at her dining room table in a white, baggy crewneck t-shirt, flipping through a magazine. Her smile is wide, but she shyly turned her head away from the camera. She was blushing. Here's Amy again.
They were both very attractive by society's standards. Fun-loving, did what young couples do. They seemed very much in love.
And after nearly 2 years, on Christmas Eve of 1989, Paul proposed with the diamond ring like Karla had always wanted.
The two got engaged at Niagara Falls.
At one of North America's natural wonders, with cool mist in the air and all the colors of autumn surrounding them, the two committed to forever together as the cascading falls poured into the Atlantic.
They were just starting their lives together, and things were looking like they were going well for the couple.
In their first 3 years together, Paul got real close with Karla's family. Her parents, Karla and Dorothy, and with Karla's two younger sisters, Tammy and Lori. All three of them were spitting images of one another: golden blonde hair, bronze complexions, and wide smiles. Kathy says they were close-knit and enjoyed a lot of quality time.
They did a lot of things together. They spent a lot of holidays together and just quality family time, hanging out.
John mentioned their home was a classic middle-class suburban single-story house on a quiet street. There was a single tree on their grassy front lawn and a swimming pool in the backyard.
On the main floor, there's 3 bedrooms. Her sister has 1 bedroom. Her middle sister has another one. Their parents have a 3rd bedroom.
And if you went downstairs to the lower level into the basement, you'd find Karla's room. This is where she and Paul spent countless nights watching movies together. The Homolka's approval of Paul meant everything to Karla. And by 1990, Paul was a welcome fixture in their home.
He's staying there all the time.
John told us that's when Paul's days of the 2-hour drive to St. Catharines were over.
He eventually decides to leave accounting and move in with her family in St. Catharines.
He joined Karla in the basement, where the two could have their own private fortress. Down there, the two could escape the world together and do whatever they wanted. Listen to their music loudly, watch movies for hours, talk endlessly about their wedding plans, and dream up the life they couldn't wait to start with one another. So, Paul became part of the family, and a year after their Christmas-time engagement, everyone was looking forward to celebrating the holidays together. The Homolkas decided to throw a festive Christmas party, complete with seasonal favorites like eggnog and classic holiday tunes. There were presents scattered across the floor under a colorfully decorated tree. Winters get cold in the north, but inside their home, with the new addition to their family, things felt especially warm that year. This was their first holiday together. It was a big deal. So you know Paul took his camera out to film the special night. Captured just how lively and magical the night was. Until the festivities took a startling turn. The family were indulging in holiday treats and drinks, including Karla's younger sister, Tammy. John Rosen, longtime Canadian defense attorney, says how the night unfolded.
Tammy has a lot to drink, and it's not straight booze, it's mixed drinks and things.
There's a home video of Paul recording Tammy. Her hair was up in a ponytail. She's wearing a white shirt and jeans, and she's seated on the family couch. It's a leather Chesterfield. She's holding a wine glass, sipping a yellow-tinted drink on ice.
Hi, Tam. How you doing? What are you thinking there? Ice.
Tammy doesn't look like she's doing okay. She looks sleepy, like she wasn't all there. Kathy saw another clip of the home video.
So there's video footage of that night because Paul Bernardo was videotaping everything. And she's like, oh, I'm seeing double, like that kind of thing. So you can tell she really is feeling pretty woozy.
Nobody thought too much of it. It all seemed in good fun and in the holiday spirit.
And she gets a little bit drunk, and the parents decide to go to bed. The sister decides she's going to retire for the night, go call her boyfriend, and the other three adjourn to the basement to watch movies.
Lori calls it a night. But while Karla, Paul, and Tammy are watching a movie, something unexpected happens.
Tammy passes out.
And she doesn't wake up.
So they called 911. The police and the ambulance came.
They did what they could to revive her.
When the paramedics arrived, they, had to intubate her, took her to hospital.
But they were too late.
And unfortunately, Tammy died the next day in hospital.
Paul and Karla were in shock. They couldn't believe how fast everything had happened. Kathy says they were noticeably shaken up.
When the paramedics came to the house and the police came to the house, Paul Bernardo was hysterical. He was apparently banging his head against the wall and why is this happening? Karla was also crying.
She was visibly inconsolable.
Her parents were asking what was going on. She couldn't really put a sentence together because she was crying.
The Homolkas were trying to make sense of it all. How could Tammy be alive, having fun in one moment and dead the next? Officers at the scene tried to put the pieces together. Here's John again with the details from the night.
The officers who attended didn't see anything out of the ordinary except a young teenager who had had too much alcohol and fallen asleep.
They assessed the circumstances of Tammy's death quickly.
And it was treated as an accident.
But some officers thought there was something suspicious about Karla and Paul's initial reaction to Tammy's death. Kathy recalls that Paul's reaction was particularly strange.
The police wrote at the time over the top with, a bit more dramatic than I guess the boyfriend of the sister of someone they wouldn't expect to act that way.
Tammy's death may have been ruled accidental, but as details emerged, there were some that begged more questions. Nick Prawn was working as a reporter for the Toronto Star back then. His focus was to report on all things police-related, and because of that, he had access to pictures of Tammy the day she was found dead.
What was suspicious was she had burn marks all around her mouth. I know in talking to one of the officers, and he said that it just bothered him.
Something else was odd. Not long after their emotional reaction to the death of Tammy, Karla and Paul bounced back with a life-goes-on attitude. They were still gung-ho about moving ahead with their wedding plans underway, almost as if nothing happened. Amy says they weren't keeping it hidden from their friends and family either.
Karla had wrote to a friend that was basically complaining that some of the money that was being put aside for her wedding was no longer there because it was used for the funeral. And she was also almost upset that her father was still grieving.
And while most details of Tammy's funeral have been kept private, what was reported about Paul's behavior at the service is nothing short of strange.
I read somewhere that did he sniff her hair or something? He was playing with her hair at the funeral. Ugh. It's so creepy. Ugh.
Something about the whole thing just didn't seem right.
These are huge red flags. That's not the behavior of a grieving family member.
Take a minute to imagine losing a loved one, a sibling. That's someone you've spent more time with and know better than anyone else in the world. Wouldn't you be devastated? In the wake of Tammy's death, Karla and Paul insisted on carrying out their dream wedding, and it was causing a rift. Remember, these two wanted a celebration for the ages, with no expense spared. A horse-drawn carriage, catering, decorations, tuxedos, and of course, a show-stopping wedding gown. Kathy recalls that the pressure was on, and it was a stressful time for the Homolkas.
There was a lot of tension in the Homolka house after Tammy died. And at a certain point, I believe her parents had said to her, like, can we tone this down a little bit? The wedding is going to cost a fortune, and we just had to pay a lot of money for Tammy's funeral, which is, an unexpected, expensive cost.
Karla refused to tone it down and grew even more impatient with her parents' attitude.
And she was really, really miffed about it, that the family was, not willing to carry on with these elaborate wedding plans. So much so that her and Paul actually moved out before the wedding.
Their sudden move was part Karla and Paul's decision and part request of her parents.
The Homolkas said, we need some private time. We want to grieve without Paul in the house. He needs to leave.
Paul and Karla found a place to rent in a neighboring community called Port Dalhousie.
Port Dalhousie is a little town that is very quaint, and it's one of the many little beautiful towns right by Lake Ontario. And the house that they rented was a cute little pink clapboard house that, looked like it should be in a postcard. It was so cute.
The house sat on a quiet street called Bayview Drive. It was paneled on the outside. To get to the front door, you'd have to walk up 5 steps. It had a covered entranceway. The front yard wasn't too much to write home about, but for a new couple's first home, the little house was perfect. Just like the house, Port Dalhousie is small too. Its population lands at about 5,000, but it boasts epic lakefront views. From their cute little pink house, they carried on with their wedding plans, without the distraction of the family drama. But they still expected the family to foot the bill. Here's Nick again.
He said, well, he told the Homolkas to take out another mortgage on your house to pay for our wedding.
Paul and Karla were set on getting their way. Megan remembers that strangely. Despite Tammy's death and disagreements, the wedding was a go.
They went ahead and they had it. The Homolka family participated, and Karla had her perfect wedding day. This beautiful, lavish wedding that Karla had wanted so badly almost didn't happen because of this tragedy that the Homolka family had suffered 6 months earlier with the death of Tammy.
So the young, relentless couple got their way and pulled off the wedding of their dreams. But some of their guests could sense that there was something boiling beneath the picture-perfect surface.
You could tell that she had issues, but her friends at the time just didn't quite see it. They knew something was wrong, but they just couldn't put their finger on, what exactly it was.
While friends may have raised their eyebrows, Karla and Paul liked to keep up appearances. Megan Sachs is a criminology professor. She told us it was easy to see how important it was to the couple to come off as perfect.
That was certainly one of their things, both physical, material, and in every way.
The two put a lot of effort into their outward-facing personas.
They liked the way they looked to the outside world. It was important, I guess, for them to maintain a dual life.
Were their wedding guests onto something?
In reality, they were not the people that anyone thought that they actually were. Everyone was wrong.
Previously, on Very Scary People, the Ken and Barbie killers. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka met in the fall of 1987. It was love at first sight. Their young love blossomed, and by Christmas Eve 1989, they were engaged. After their engagement, Paul moved in with the Homolka family, and during a family Christmas party, tragedy struck. Karla's youngest sister, Tammy, had too much to drink and didn't wake up. By the time first responders arrived at the scene, Tammy was dead. It was ruled accidental alcohol poisoning. In the wake of Tammy's untimely passing, while the Homolkas grieved, Karla and Paul insisted on going forward with their wedding planning. And despite the tension between the couple and Karla's family, the show went on. Karla and Paul got what they wanted, their dream wedding. But at the celebration, something was rumbling beneath the picture-perfect surface. It's the Thursday before Easter weekend in 1992. It's a rainy afternoon, and class has just been dismissed at Holy Cross Secondary School in the Toronto suburb of St. Catharines. High school students in their classic green plaid Catholic school uniforms are pouring out of the halls. And one of those students is 15-year-old Kristen French.
Kristen grew up in St. Catharines, and she, by all accounts, was a very popular straight-A student involved in lots of extracurriculars, swimming, rowing.
Her friends loved her. Gorgeous girl, long dark hair. She had such a full life.
Confident, loving, from a loving home, who loved her brother and her dog and her parents and didn't live more than a few blocks away from her school.
Kristen's parents are expecting her to let the dog out after school. But that gloomy spring afternoon, Kristen's mom couldn't get a hold of her.
The mom had called home from work to talk to her. She wasn't home, and that was around 4 o'clock.
Kristen isn't the type to not call her mom or dad when her plans change. And 9 times out of 10, she heads straight home to get her chores and homework done.
Kristen's parents very quickly grew concerned because she was just taking a short walk from school to home as she normally did, and when she didn't return, they knew something was terribly wrong.
Little did they know, earlier that day would be the last time she is seen. And by 6 o'clock,
the police had been called and they were searching for Kristen.
15-year-old Kristen French was apparently abducted in broad daylight from a church parking lot on Thursday, less than a kilometer from home.
Her disappearance was mind-boggling.
St. Catharines was not a place where people were grabbed off the street. For someone to be grabbed off the street in the middle of the day, a young person walking home from school, it just doesn't happen.
But Kristen's abductors leave a trace.
Her shoe was found, suggesting she struggled with her abductor before being pulled into a car.
And their disturbing crime doesn't go unnoticed. There are eyewitnesses. From ID, this is Very Scary People, the Ken and Barbie killers. I'm your host, Donnie Wahlberg. You might remember me from our first season, the Amityville Murders. And now, in this season, we're traveling to Canada, a place known for its cold beer and warm welcomes, to trace the twisted path of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, a couple from Toronto that appeared loving and wholesome. The truth is, they were anything but. We'll explore how the boy and the girl next door became the killers known as Ken and Barbie. This is episode 3, Kristen French. The day after Kristen was reported missing, a huge search party formed.
As many as 2,000 people gathered to help search the north end of St. Catharines for clues to Kristen's whereabouts.
Kathy Kenzora remembers it well from her days reporting on the case on Talk Radio AM 640.
There were massive searches arranged for Kristen French that started on the Friday and lasted through the entire weekend.
It was an all-hands-on-deck kind of emergency.
It was so widespread, and people from, Toronto and Mississauga drove to St. Catharines to be part of it.
Police officers from across the region pooled their resources and organized their own group too. They dubbed themselves the Green Ribbon Task Force because search party members were wearing green ribbons as a symbol of their hope of finding Kristen. They posted flyers all around the city. The flyer had a black and white picture of Kristen on the top left corner, and on the right, a list of her basic identifying information. Weight, 110. Height, 5'5", age 15, brown hair, brown eyes. The day she was taken, she was wearing her school uniform, green tights, a green V-neck sweater, a white shirt, and a black leather jacket. And towards the bottom of the flyer, there was a message. If anyone had any information regarding her disappearance, to contact the Niagara Regional Police. Mike McCready was one of the 2,000 volunteers who searched for Kristen. They looked high and low, crossing fields, parks, wooded areas, and near the shores of neighboring bodies of water.
It was a community event. People from all walks of life, poor and rich, all different ethnicities pulled together and came together to search for her.
They were all moved by Kristen's disappearance. It hit so close to home. Kathy remembers how scared everyone felt.
It could have been anyone. It could have been you. It could have been your sister, your friend, your mother. Anyone could have been pushed into a car. And I think that's what got people so upset and so concerned and wanting to find Kristen.
At this point in the investigation, officers knew Kristen was last seen in the parking lot of Grace Lutheran Church. From the outside, it looked like a traditional place of worship. It was a red brick building with red trim. A large gold cross covered the front entrance. People saw what happened, and as the search effort intensified, substantial information rose to the top.
A witness came forward to say she had been driving by the church parking lot, looked over her shoulder, and saw what she thought were kids fooling around. And they were kind of pushing back and forth, and someone got pushed into the car. But she thought about it for a second, like, oh, that's odd. Then she said, oh, it's probably just teenagers goofing around, and she kept going.
But they weren't just fooling around. Kristen was fighting for her life.
They described two male offenders that she'd walked up to the car. One had gotten out and then was shoving her into the back of the car. She was resisting, fighting, and the car took off at a high rate of speed, just peeling out of the parking lot onto the street and down, and almost hit another car and, made this scene that caught the attention of the folks in the area just going about their normal business.
Since multiple people witnessed Kristen get abducted, a critical clue in the investigation came to light: the make and model of the car Kristen was pulled into.
Based on what police call a solid witness account, they're also looking for a car similar to this, a 1982 or newer Camaro or Firebird, off-white or cream in color.
While they had the make and model, the color of the car was still in question. Some witnesses described it as gold. The exact color may have been up for debate, but Mike McCready remembers that once that tip was made public, the Camaro was instantly infamous. Eyes were peeled.
Everybody was sort of on the lookout for that vehicle.
So there were billboards and there were flyers and posters all saying, have you seen this car?
The billboard Kathy remembers displayed a giant drawing of a Camaro with bold text to the right: wanted in the abduction of Kristen French. The Green Ribbon Task Force began putting a huge effort into following the Camaro lead. Here's Jim Van Allen with details of their approach.
Green Ribbon Task Force made a decision that they would try and identify all owners of gold Camaros in Ontario, and there were many. And when one became known in outlying areas, we would be assigned to go and contact the person, do a background investigation, and report the results to the Green Ribbon Task Force.
Kathy said all of Eastern Toronto knew about this car.
I felt sorry for anyone that had a cream-colored Camaro because that was the focus of the entire investigation.
An enormous effort was devoted to finding the alleged Camaro that got away with Kristen French in tow. They even established a tip line called the Project Green Ribbon Personal Response. The volunteers fielded calls from people who may have spotted it. But despite massive mobilization to track down the vehicle, the once promising tip was leading nowhere. Mike said this is when the morale of the search party began to fade, and the hope of finding Kristen alive was dwindling.
We were pretty much concerned that we were looking for a dead body. Many of us didn't believe that she would still be alive.
So they divided the search into branches.
We were looking through things where a body would be, not where a live person would be. Other people were doing parts of the search where possibly they may have found somebody who was still alive.
While the possibility of finding Kristen dead was devastating, the Green Ribbon Task Force and volunteers still tirelessly pushed forward to give the French family desperately needed closure, whatever the outcome.
I remember we did sort of a systematic line search, and I was near the Bunting Road area in St. Catharines, and we all walked sort of a line and spread out to make sure that we covered all the areas. And I remember at one point distinctively going through a dumpster looking. And that was hard because it was spooky. You didn't want to find something in there. But at the same time, you wanted to give the family and the community resolution as well.
As the weekend progressed, leads and searches continued to go nowhere. But at this point in the investigation, the French family was still holding out hope.
The agony of the past few days was clearly evident on the faces of Kristen French's family. They say they feel Kristen is still alive.
But there was no denying. The case was slipping away. The French's positive outlook spiraled into exasperation.
Kristen French's parents remain in seclusion, surrounded by family and friends, desperate for any news of their daughter.
With the chances of finding Kristen alive growing slimmer, her family was growing even more eager for answers. So they turned to the media. That Easter Sunday following her abduction, her father, Doug, spoke at a press conference with her mom, Donna, at his side.
Kristen, if you can hear or read this, you want to know that we are thinking of you and that everything can be done is being done.
Kathy remembers watching as Doug sat at a pop-up table scattered with multiple news stations' microphones. He was wearing a white shirt and sweater vest. He was holding back tears behind his wide-frame glasses, pleading for his daughter's safe return. You could see their friends standing behind them, rubbing their shoulders and providing support.
Kristen's father went on TV and made an appeal for his daughter, which was absolutely heartbreaking. So often you hear about or you see appeals on TV when someone is missing, and sadly, you know that it's going to fall on deaf ears, that, it's often the person saying, if you're out there, we're here for you, we're going to find you. Unfortunately, most of the time that person is already passed.
If Canada didn't already know about Kristen French, after the press conference, they certainly did. And the national outcry put even more pressure on finding her, dead or alive. Volunteer search efforts started to peter out after the initial days of Kristen's disappearance. But the Green Ribbon Task Force forged ahead. When finally, 15 days after she was last seen in the Grace Lutheran's church parking lot, Kristen's body was discovered. FBI agent Craig McCrary called she was found in a ditch on the side of the road in North Burlington, roughly 35 miles from where she was last seen in her hometown.
Her body had been rolled out in one of these informal kind of areas off a road where people just kind of put trash and things.
While finding Kristen alive was what everyone had been holding out hope for. Recovering her body brought a sense of conclusion for the community who had so actively invested in searching for her. Here's Mike again, one of the volunteers who was dedicated to finding Kristen from the start.
It was through the media, and it was a while after we did the search. It was shocking. Like, you were expecting it, but to hear it made it real. Like, just thinking that it was going to happen was a thought, but there was always the possibility that she will come home alive. And then it was a finality, but the finality that you never wanted to come true.
The summer after Kristen's body was found, CHCH-TV in Ontario aired a nearly 90-minute television special called The Abduction of Kristen French. It not only told the story of the kidnapping and ensuing search, but also captured her family's grief. In the first half of the special, viewers saw her mother, Donna, in Kristen's room, still full of her belongings.
Such an intense feeling of loss, I just don't have the heart to put anything away yet. Right now, it would be like packing away my memories. And I just can't do that.
Unable to part with them, she tearfully shows the camera crew around Kristen's room, just as she left it. Her makeup on the counter, photo albums and yearbooks, closet full of clothes she planned to wear to future family celebrations. The camera pans out on Donna. She's seated on Kristen's twin bed, topped with white linens and stuffed animals. She's flipping through photo albums. Leaving Kristen's room untouched brought her comfort, but it's clear to those who watched that there was no salve for grief so palpable.
What really gets tough is if you think of the things that will never come.
She thinks of Kristen never falling in love, never being a mother. In the video, Donna choked up.
The fact that she'll never marry, won't be able to plan a wedding. That's the hardest part, is just thinking ahead to things that she won't be able to do.
While the French family were still trying to pick up the pieces, another new anxiety dawned on the town of St. Catharines. The people who took her and presumably killed her were still out there.
The news of them finding the body now, it shifted to, okay, that part is over. Now it's like, what can we do to find the people who did this to her? They're still out there. They can do it again. And that was the fear.
And after Kristen was discovered, a startling connection was made. Her case was eerily similar to Leslie Mahaffey's, the young girl whose body was discovered nearly a year earlier in Lake Gibson, the day Paul and Karla got married. Wade Hemsworth reported on Leslie's disappearance and death for the Hamilton Spectator.
Their bodies were found in the communities of the other. So Leslie, who had disappeared in Burlington, her remains were discovered in St. Catharines. Kristen, who had lived in St. Catharines, Ontario, her remains were discovered in Burlington, and that's a good 45 minutes away or more.
Paul Hunter says when Leslie was found, people were shocked.
When they found Leslie's body parts encased in cement in a lake, it became something else. It's like, you've got to be kidding. Like, who does this? This is not Canada. This is not us. In cement blocks, for God's sake.
The news just kept getting worse.
And then, a year later, Kristen French goes missing. 2 weeks after that, they find her body shaved, hair gone. I remember going to work the day after Kristen French's body was discovered. And I was stopping at a coffee shop to get a coffee and a newspaper. And on the front page was a photo of police with Kristen French's body in the dump. And the photo was investigators kind of holding up her hand like this. That's all you could see was this limp hand. And to me, that's when it hit me. This is all, like, there is something wrong here.
Fear and frustration grew across Canada. Between Leslie and Kristen's murders and the Scarborough rapist still at large, it was an especially terrifying time to call Toronto home.
It felt like everything was out of control because nothing was happening about any of it. And nobody knew if it would ever be resolved at that point. It was just like, how many more people are going to die? or be raped or be chopped into bits and thrown in a lake.
The whole eastern region of the city felt like they just couldn't catch a break. These weren't isolated events anymore.
So the question is, were these cases related?
Leslie and Kristen were from different cities, but the similarities in their cases just couldn't be ignored.
One part that was very hard to take, that we all wondered about, was the proximity of Kristen French's body to Leslie Mahaffey's grave site. You know, they're almost within sight of one another. And so then it became very hard to shake the idea that these things must be related.
Again, the community and the task force were back to work.
It sort of became a serial event where possibly it could be your child. So everybody identified with Kristen French as being their own child.
Kathy recalls the lengths police went to connect the dots.
They exhumed Leslie's body and found marks on her back that were similar to the marks that were on Kristen's back.
And this unnerving evidence suggested an even more horrifying and viable prospect.
Police are not discounting the possibility a serial killer may be at work in the area.
I think police understood that right away, that they were dealing with a serial killer and that these cases were definitely connected.
On the last episode of Very Scary People, the Ken and Barbie killers, 15-year-old Kristen French was abducted in the quiet town of St. Catharines. Eyewitnesses confirmed she was taken in broad daylight from a church parking lot walking home from school. After 2 weeks of investigating her disappearance, her body was found in a roadside ditch 35 miles away from home. The discovery of Kristen French sounded another alarm. Her case was strikingly similar to Leslie Mahaffey's, the missing girl who was found just a year earlier in Lake Gibson. As law enforcement made more connections between the two cases, it became more and more clear that a serial killer was operating in eastern Toronto. And after Karla Homolka was sent to the hospital, there's a break in the Scarborough rapist case. It's January 1993, 8 months since Kristen French was found dead. Karla Homolka is shaken up. The skin around her eyes is puffy and black, and her petite frame is covered in bruises. She's just come into the emergency room at St. Catharines General Hospital after being violently attacked during a dispute with her husband, Paul Bernardo.
Emergency ward, and the doctor there said it was the worst case of wife abuse he'd ever seen.
The abuse is shocking because outwardly, Paul and Karla appear to be a beautiful young couple who have it all. The fairy tale wedding, the charming pink house, the loving relationship. Is it all a mirage? While Karla is being treated for her injuries at the hospital, the Ontario Provincial Police are called in for routine questioning. It's standard procedure when anybody is admitted into the hospital for injuries related to domestic violence. She doesn't hold back on the grisly details of what she's been enduring at the hands of her husband. Turns out, he isn't just physically abusive, he's controlling too. Here's Nick Prawn, a former reporter from the Toronto Star.
I can read all the things she wrote out, please. He forced me to drink alcohol daily. He made me stay up late even when I had to work the next day. He didn't allow me to seek medications. He strangled me with his hands.
It gets worse. Karla tells the officers that Paul is relentless and nothing can stop him. He can make a weapon out of anything.
He threw knives at me. He held a knife to my throat, hit me with a piece of firewood. He hit me with his shoes. He hit me with a flashlight. He hit me with a screwdriver.
But he didn't just hit her with it. According to Karla, he took the screwdriver and stabbed her with it.
He stabbed me in the back of the head, causing her scalp to bleed.
Karla tells the police every single graphic detail.
He often ripped handfuls of hair out from my head. He would punch me, he would kick me, he would slap me.
And she said the violent incidents escalated to emotional abuse too.
Once he pushed me down the stairs. He called me names, slut, whore, and the C word.
What they're hearing from Karla is undeniably gut-wrenching. It's heartbreaking, and it turned everything the community assumed about the young couple on its head. Day in and day out, she's being tormented and traumatized. Karla's life with Paul isn't the heaven-sent love she spent her girlhood wishing for. It is a living hell. Around the same time that Karla is hospitalized, experts at the Ontario Centre for Forensic Science are testing DNA left behind by the Scarborough rapist, and the trail is leading straight to Paul.
They test it, and it comes up on the DNA, not as a perfect match as you would get today very easily, but given the technology at the time, sufficient to make him a person of interest.
So the police have some more questions for Karla about her husband.
So the police, as they usually do, is they do an investigation. Who is this guy and where is he living and what's going on in his life? They go to the wife to talk to her first. It's like a bullseye. You start at the edges and you move your way into the center.
Could Karla be the key to solving the Scarborough rapist investigation? A case they've been trying to crack for years? From ID, this is Very Scary People, the Ken and Barbie Killers. I'm your host, Donnie Wahlberg. You might remember me from our first season, the Amityville Murders. And now, in this season, we're traveling to Canada, a place known for its cold beer and warm welcomes, to trace the twisted path of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, a couple from Toronto that appeared loving and wholesome. The truth is, they were anything but. We'll explore how the boy and the girl next door became the killers known as Ken and Barbie. This is episode 4, The DNA Sample. On the surface, Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka had everything. A loving relationship, a sports car, a home to call their own, and an exciting future. Their life was full of the kinds of things that some people might envy. Kathy Kenzora remembers how important appearances were to them.
Well, it was very important to Paul and Karla to look like a really cool, young, successful couple. They were all about having, the latest fashions and all the gadgets. And they were going out for fancy dinners and drinking champagne. And even their wedding was all about, the pomp. I think it was very important to them to always look like they had everything.
In their Ken and Barbie world, everything was perfect. Megan Sachs, co-host of Women in Crime podcast, says it was all smoke and mirrors. The two were playing make-believe.
They were living dual lives, but in reality, they were not the people that anyone thought that they actually were.
They're smiling, they're happy, they look like young, energetic, normal people. They could be your neighbors.
Boy, were they wrong.
While Paul and Karla appeared outwardly picture-perfect to their community, friends, and family, Kathy says behind closed doors, it was an entirely different story.
Right from the early days of their relationship, whether it was controlling her to not go to college, restricting what friends she could hang around with, it, eventually escalated to physical arguments and more aggressive abuse.
Paul had stripped Karla away from everything. He had been controlling and abusing her even before they were married. Mary Garofalo recalls watching a video from their wedding day where Paul openly referenced abusing Karla.
Well, a lot of videos were wedding videos where you go up to a guest and you say, congratulate the happy couple. And he would joke around about beating his wife. And meanwhile, he was actually beating his wife.
The signs were in plain sight.
I remember that video was sent to me. The uncle was joking around about, don't beat your wife. And she's looking in the camera because she knows very well that she's now being beaten every evening and being humiliated verbally by her husband every night.
Karla's body language and expression in the video revealed something both so sad and so sinister.
It was just so telling because she always had that fake smile on her face. It did not look genuine. It was, I'm keeping up the facade so that nobody can see how disgusting our lives are.
But Nick Prawn, who reported on the Scarborough rapist case for the Toronto Star, knew Paul and Karla's relationship didn't fool everyone. According to Nick, some wedding guests started to sense something wasn't right with Karla the day they were pronounced husband and wife.
You could tell that she had issues, but her friends at the time just didn't quite see it. They knew something was wrong, but they just couldn't put their finger on, what exactly it was.
Some guests thought she had cold feet. Turns out it wasn't just wedding day jitters. Karla was scared, seemingly trapped in a terrible situation, suffering in a never-ending cycle of abuse.
She was not happy at all. There was no smiling. And one of her friends said it was like I was going to a funeral and not a wedding.
Little did they know, what they were picking up on was that their friend was about to walk down the aisle and make a lifetime commitment to a man who actively abused her. But despite the ongoing violence in her private life, Karla went ahead with the wedding she so desperately desired. It's hard to imagine the abusive dynamic between Paul and Karla growing worse. But after the wedding, that's exactly what happened. The day Karla was admitted to the hospital, what she revealed to the police was brutal and nothing short of monstrous. Here she is telling the police about the abuse she endured in her own words.
If I didn't turn the water tap off completely, he'd hit me. If I didn't say the right thing, he'd hit me. He held knives to my throat. He told me I better watch my back. He said, always watch your back with me.
She wasn't safe anywhere Paul was. Not even when they'd sit down to eat together, drive around town, or at night when they went to bed. Every private moment between the two of them was an opportunity for Paul's violence towards her. Kathy says it wasn't long before Paul brought violence into their intimate life, too.
Also, she says, had started becoming more violent with her during sex and was using ligatures, and she was starting to get afraid that he might kill her.
Karla's feelings were right, because eventually he did threaten her.
He threatened that if she ever told on him or left him, she would not only kill her, but he would kill her family as well. And that's why she told the police afterwards. That's why she stayed with him.
The intimate partner violence didn't stop. And soon, Karla started missing her work shifts at Martindale Animal Clinic. She kept the abuse hidden as long as she could. But then her friends and colleagues started noticing signs of foul play on her body and face. Kathy says Karla showed up to work 4 days after the beating that ultimately led her to seek medical attention. When she showed up to work, they noticed she was badly bruised, with black eyes and scrapes too. I don't advise you look it up, but there's a picture of Karla on the internet taken in the aftermath of the attack. You can see the hospital gown tied behind her neck. Her blonde hair with dark roots is tousled, and under her closed eyes, you can clearly see just how deeply bruised they were.
And it was obvious that something bad had happened. She told her coworkers that she was in a car accident.
The car accident claim was suspicious. They didn't believe her lie, and the signs could no longer be ignored. Her coworkers felt they had no choice but to take action. They wanted to protect her from getting hurt again. It was time to get her some support.
Someone anonymously called her mom to say, something's going on with your daughter. You need to get down here.
Karla's mom, Dorothy, took the coworker's cry for help seriously. Worried about her daughter, she quickly went to her aid. Karla's mom couldn't believe how badly hurt Karla was, and that the man she believed was such a caring husband, the man that she welcomed into her family and home, the man that she trusted her daughter with, could do this. Days before Karla's mom was called for help, Paul and Karla got into an argument that escalated quickly.
They'd had she says, a fight over he came home from doing something and she didn't ask him how he was.
And then Paul grabbed a flashlight.
He beat her very badly with a heavy flashlight and really bruised her. She was clearly a victim who was battered.
The bruising from inside her brain caused these raccoon bruises on her face that were just massive black eyes.
At this point, her parents were kind of cued into what was going on.
And Kathy says once they knew the horrifying reality Karla was living, and after seeing her so terribly battered, they pleaded with her to leave Paul.
So the mom came to see her and was shocked when she saw her face and convinced her, you need to leave Paul, you need to get out of there.
They took Karla over to her and Paul's home to grab her personal essentials, the things they didn't share as a couple, her clothes, her toiletries, and her valuables, so that she wouldn't have to return.
She went into hiding essentially at her aunt and uncle's place.
Little is known about Karla's extended family. It seems fair to assume that they chose to protect details of their identities from the public in hopes of maintaining normal lives, a life without association to Paul Bernardo. Still, what we do know is that they were there for Karla in her dire time of need. She escaped the threat of his continued violence in Brampton, about 70 miles north of Karla and Paul's place in Port Dalhousie. That last physical altercation with Paul was the final straw.
Karla Homolka finally left Paul Bernardo.
Once Karla left their pink Port Dalhousie house, Paul started to face the consequences of his actions. Here's Kathy explaining how it all went down.
He was living by himself in the house.
Paul was spiraling. He couldn't stand the thought of losing Karla for good.
And, by all accounts, he was just walking around aimlessly, like crying and making tapes, calling for Karla to come back to him and just really sounding like he was losing it.
So we went out looking for those tapes, and we found them.
I've been here for 5 days alone. It's not a long time, but it's hard when you're alone. It's pretty hard, pal. I walk to the house sometimes. I go, Karla, hey, Car. But I don't get any answer. It hurts so much. God, it hurts. It's like everything in my life, I did it to myself. It's you.
Amy says this was just the beginning.
And this is when everything started to fall apart for Paul.
Back at the hospital, Karla finished up her formal statement with the police about the domestic dispute. It was clear from her interview and injuries that she was a victim of intimate partner violence. There was just no denying it. She agreed to press charges against Paul. Paul was arrested after the brutal flashlight beating, but he wasn't held in custody for long. But by the time he was released, Karla was in a safe place with support from her family. Paul may have dodged a longer punishment for physically assaulting Karla, but his luck would soon run out. His DNA had been tested on February 1st, 1993, and when the results came back, the police found a connection to the Scarborough rapist investigation. Remember, in November 1990, after police released the Scarborough rapist composite sketch, the Metro Toronto police brought Paul in for questioning. After being interrogated, Paul agreed to give a sample of both his hair and his blood.
Because of a backlog, his DNA had just been sitting, and they finally got around to testing it.
After digging into the official Metro Toronto Police investigation review, we found that there was a one-probe DNA match between the sample of Paul's blood and saliva and a semen sample taken from rape kits of the Scarborough rapist victims. It was enough to identify Paul as the probable suspect. But why did 3 years go by without further investigation into Paul? There were multiple tips pointing to him after the composite sketch was released. He was questioned and they had his DNA. Something wasn't adding up. It's wild to think that DNA would sit untested for years. But back then, DNA testing was still a pretty new science.
We're not talking about today where we can move things quicker. We're talking back in the 90s, there was one DNA technician and lots of DNA to be tested.
And Paul's DNA was among 79 additional suspect samples. There just weren't enough resources. And because the rapes had stopped in 1990, testing DNA samples was no longer a high priority. But given the state of technology of the time, didn't they know that it could be years down the road? They did have the DNA but couldn't get the job done. Victims could have gotten justice sooner. It's baffling. Still, the timing of Paul's DNA match and Karla's experience with domestic violence at the hands of Paul couldn't be more of a coincidence. And for law enforcement, it was a long overdue discovery. That's when they knew it was time to speak to Karla again. Paul Hunter, who reported on the investigation, recalls how it all went down.
When they finally get around to testing, they say, hey, we got a match. Where is this guy? Oh, he's in St. Catharines. Oh, and we've got a report that his wife had just been beaten up by him. Oh, so he's violent. They're starting to, wait a second, right? Oh, they go and talk to Karla.
And on February 9th, 1993, a month after Karla was admitted to the hospital, the police showed up at her aunt and uncle's home with more questions.
They sit her down and they say, hi, we understand you've been, assaulted by your husband. We just want to ask you a few questions. Has he been violent for a long time? Is he abusive with you?
Greg McCrary worked on the case as an FBI agent. He says Karla was cooperative.
She held it together during that interview with the cops, and the police did an excellent job in interviewing her. And they used, in my opinion, a very skillful interview approach with her. It was non-adversarial. It was non-accusatorial.
But then the interview took a turn. Greg says it was a turn Karla was not expecting.
I'm assuming she thought she was going to be interviewed just about the domestic assault. But then she found, there were Metro Toronto police officers asking her did she know anything about the Scarborough rapes?
Suddenly, Karla knew exactly what the officers were looking for. She started to panic. And during the interview, she dropped a bomb on them that they didn't see coming. The day Paul and Karla got married, Paul confessed something to her.
At the wedding was the first time that Paul informed Karla that he was in fact the Scarborough rapist.
Suddenly, the mysterious sense that something was rumbling under the surface of Paul and Karla's perfect relationship on their wedding day made sense. The guests who noticed a sadness in Karla weren't off base.
Karla says that was the worst night of her life.
And she carried the heavy burden of Paul's confession as a dark secret for nearly 2 years. With this revelatory information, law enforcement was able to fill in the blanks in the Scarborough investigation. Here's Greg.
It all became crystal clear as to what we were dealing with. The rapes had stopped when Bernardo had moved from Scarborough.
Things were adding up. Paul moved out of Scarborough and into the Homolka home in St. Catharines in 1990, which matched up with the timeline of when the Scarborough rapist seemed to have vanished. His last attack was May 26, 1990. Then, in February 1991, after Paul and Karla moved out of the Homolka's house and into their pink home in Port Dalhousie, there was an isolated daytime attack of a 14-year-old girl at a nearby bus stop.
Within 9 weeks of him moving in, there was a rape in close proximity to his residence there at Bayview that had all the hallmarks of the rapes that had occurred in Scarborough.
The sequence of events lined up precisely with Paul's moves.
It made perfect sense that this was what had occurred, and the escalation was there.
With Karla's case-breaking accusation and the timely DNA match, Metro Toronto police finally had enough evidence to make their move. On February 17, 1993, an arrest was made in a case they had been trying to solve for nearly 6 years.
Police have 28-year-old Paul Bernardo in custody, accused of being the notorious Scarborough rapist. They arrested him late yesterday at this house in St. Catharines that he rented with his wife.
That evening, slumped over in white pants and an army green jacket, Paul was once again making his way into the police station, but this time in handcuffs. He kept the hood of his jacket over his face, and his hands were restrained behind his back. He didn't look like a brazen criminal. He looked like a coward. A group of officers surrounded him. One had his hand at the back of Paul's neck as he guided him through the crowd of reporters. It was a scene. The press was everywhere. Everyone wanted to get a look at the guy who kept Scarborough on alert for so long and hurt so many women. Paul Hunter reported on the arraignment from a tiny room full of reporters.
I saw Paul Bernardo for the first time after he was arrested. He looked like a guy. He looked like somebody who lived in Scarborough. Again, he didn't look like a monster. He looked caught and defeated, but he just looked like a guy. To see him finally, I thought, so that's the Scarborough rapist, right? I thought, that's what he looks like. And that was it. There was nothing special about the guy in the end.
His non-threatening, normal-looking facade could have been why he was able to evade police as long as he did.
We expect our monsters to look like monsters, and they don't always.
And in hindsight, his ability to hide in plain sight was one of the most terrifying things about him.
When you look at him in person, he's nothing. He's just a guy who did terrible, evil, dark stuff. And that unto itself was a lesson. It doesn't take a giant monster. It just takes a guy to do these things, and he did them. And I think that's what made it even scarier, because he could do these things.
On the last episode of Very Scary People, the Ken and Barbie Killers, the picture-perfect perception of Karla and Paul's relationship couldn't be further from the truth. Paul had been physically and mentally abusing Karla for years, and after a violent attack that sent Karla to the hospital, she left Paul for good. And on February 1st, 1993, there was a break in the Scarborough rapist case. A DNA match led straight to Paul. Nearly 2 weeks later, Paul was arrested and charged as the Scarborough rapist. But there was more. Police suspected Paul was also involved in the murders of Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey. It's February 19th, 1993, 2 days after Paul Bernardo's arrest in the case of the Scarborough rapist. The Metro Toronto Police have just obtained a search warrant. They're on a mission to raid Karla and Paul's home to find the videotapes they think are hiding in the garage. And the clock is ticking. Their warrant expires in 8 days. They get in their police cars and race to Paul and Karla's charming pink house on 57 Bayview Drive in St. Catharines. Their first stop, the garage. They're confident this will be their big break, and enough to charge and convict Paul for kidnapping and murder.
And I remember talking to one of the officers going, and he said, if there's anything in here, we're going to find it.
They get into the house and start to look for the tapes, but
they weren't in the garage.
They're stumped. Without these tapes, they can't charge Paul. No sign of the tapes in the garage means they have to broaden their search. And that means turning over the entire home.
They tore the rental house apart. I mean, they stripped the floors out, everything.
After a few days, they find the buried treasure. Over 100 individual videotapes. They pull out a TV and a VCR, and right there inside Paul and Karla's home, they start to review the footage. One after another, they watch the home videos, but all they see recorded are videos of the couple celebrating holidays, vacations, and special moments between the two over the years. No murder, no kidnapping. Discouragement was mounting. The tapes they needed were still nowhere to be found.
I mean, the investigators in that case, they worked their butts off. They really worked hard, but they put in the hours, but they just didn't really come up with anything.
After 8 days, their search warrant expires, but that doesn't stop them. They're hell-bent on finding these tapes and finally giving victims the justice their families have long been waiting for. So they partner with the Green Ribbon Task Force and request additional warrants to press forward. Days turn into months.
The police had searched it for, if memory serves me, the better part of 2 months and had come up empty-handed in terms of finding these videotapes.
And still, nothing.
They looked for 71 days inside that pretty little house in Port Dalhousie, Ontario. They couldn't find it.
If they aren't in the house, then where exactly could they be? From ID, this is Very Scary People, the Ken and Barbie Killers. I'm your host, Donnie Wahlberg. You might remember me from our first season, the Amityville Murders. And now, in this season, we're traveling to Canada, a place known for its cold beer and warm welcomes, to trace the twisted path of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, a couple from Toronto that appeared loving and wholesome. The truth is, they were anything but. We'll explore how the boy and the girl next door became the killers known as Ken and Barbie. This is episode 5, The Videotapes. When we left off with Karla, she had been brutally attacked by Paul.
For Karla, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. She left Paul after that.
A month later, the Metro Toronto police met with her while she sought refuge at her aunt and uncle's home. They continued to zero in on the details she provided at the hospital. Her horrific descriptions of Paul's sexual abuse and violence got more gears turning and left them with more questions. The day Toronto police questioned Karla about Paul for a second time, they jumped right in.
We now have to ask you a few more intimate type questions, if you don't mind. And it's about, your sex life. Do you fantasize? Is it rough sex? Does he like to fantasize about schoolgirls or, young teenagers who he might kidnap and rape?
And they continued to pull on the thread, probing her for information that may point to Paul's involvement with the murders of 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey and 15-year-old Kristen French. Retired FBI agent Greg McCreary says the police got really specific.
Was she at all familiar with the parking lot of the Grace Lutheran Church? Had she ever been there?
For Karla, this was when things started to take a turn. She saw the writing on the wall.
She knew he was going down, and she didn't want to go down with him.
And as they drove away from her aunt and uncle's home, she realized something.
She apparently held it together during that interview with the cops. But once they left, she was staying with her aunt and uncle, and she sort of collapsed into their arms and said, they know everything. They know everything.
In that moment, it dawned on her. The narrative she built on remaining silent about Paul's crimes out of fear of violent retaliation could fall apart. She felt that she could be implicated in Paul's crimes. Karla knew it was time to attain legal representation. She hired a seasoned defense lawyer, George Walker. He's been practicing law in Ontario, Canada for nearly 40 years now. He looks exactly like you'd imagine. A lawyer in fitted tailored suits with slicked back hair. But in pictures of him from the time he was representing Karla, you can tell he has some flair too, sporting aviator frame glasses and patterned ties. Paul Hunter remembers Karla's proposition.
She goes and lawyers up. Boom. Right? I've got a story to tell if you grant me immunity.
His interest was piqued, and he was confident he could get Karla a plea deal if she had enough information. So, she tells George and the prosecution the story of Kristen and Leslie. But Megan Sachs says it wasn't exactly the whole story. We'll get into that later.
She did alert them as to what had happened with these crimes and, the murders and the assaults.
Still, what she did confess was enough to spark discussion about possible immunity.
And that starts the negotiation that eventually leads to her cooperation. And her cooperation is premised on her being completely truthful and open and honest, the usual. And she has to plead guilty.
So they started negotiating a plea deal with Canada's Crown Court. Canada is a monarchy. That's where the Crown moniker comes from. It's part of their governmental framework. Basically, the Crown is Canada's prosecutors. Karla approached the Crown claiming she assisted Paul in the abduction and murder of Kristen and Leslie out of intimidation and fear of more domestic violence at his hands. Here's Megan again.
Karla's claim was always that she was a victim of Paul's, which she was a victim of domestic violence, we know that, but that she wasn't a participant in these crimes because she was willing, she was forced to do it.
And because Karla claimed she was coerced into participating, she felt she didn't deserve punishment.
Karla initially wanted no time.
But her ultimate sentence was still up in the air. The video evidence was yet to be discovered, and if they were never found, the Crown was going to need more from her. Wade Hemsworth, a former reporter for the Hamilton Spectator, explains how it worked out.
At that time, there was very little physical evidence beyond circumstantial to show that Paul was the killer or one of the killers.
They were going to need Karla's testimony against Paul in court. Knowing it would be difficult to go up on the stand against her abusive husband, they offered her an incentive.
The only way to obtain that testimony would be by offering her some inducement to testify, which in her case was a lesser homicide for manslaughter and a lower sentence and lower parole eligibility than one would have with a first-degree murder conviction.
She needed this deal as much as they needed her word against his, so she agreed. She would testify in exchange for a lesser sentence.
She was nearly all they had, and she was what they needed to be certain of a conviction.
And with her cooperation, Karla's fate was sealed.
Karla was given a sentence of 10 years for her involvement in the killings of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French.
Now that the deal had been reached, it was time for Karla to start prepping for her testimony against her husband, all while Paul, who was in custody being held on charges for the Scarborough rapes at Metro East Detention Center, was completely oblivious to Karla's arrangement. At this point in the story, we know a lot is happening all at once. Here's Kathy Kenzora breaking it all down.
Paul Bernardo was arrested and charged with the Scarborough rape case, not charged with the murders of Kristen and Leslie. Meantime, Karla was in hiding at her aunt and uncle's place and realized that something was going on with Paul, that he'd been arrested. So she got herself a defense lawyer who started negotiations with the Crown regarding her giving all the information she has in exchange for a lesser charge and a lesser sentence.
But now that Karla had accused Paul of murdering Kristen and Leslie, he would potentially face additional charges: homicide and kidnapping. Now, Paul was the one looking for legal representation. Defense attorney Ken Murray decided to take on Paul's case. Ken maintained a professional look. He wore wire-frame glasses and had a full, thick mustache. Together, Paul and Ken started crafting the defense strategy, and they took a page out of the blame game playbook.
Bernardo's whole defense was simple. He admits he's a very bad guy. He acknowledges the Scarborough rapes. He acknowledges he's a kidnapper and a rapist, but he's not a killer, says Bernardo. She's the killer. That was the only way that he could escape the rest of his life in prison. He would be lucky if he got away with a long prison term instead of his whole life. And that was all predicated on his word against her word. Ken versus Barbie. Paul versus Karla.
Meanwhile, the new charges he was facing became public. Paul's face was on every news channel and on the cover of every newspaper. On Thursday, February 18th, 1993, The day after his arrest, the Toronto Sun's front page read in bold white type against a blue background, "Arrest in rape murder spree. St. Catharines accountant charged in Kristen French, Leslie Mahaffey murders, and Scarborough rapist case." In the right margin was a black and white picture of Paul on top and Leslie and Kristen's school photos in color below. All of Canada made the connection. The Scarborough rapist and the serial killer in East Toronto were the same person. Kathy Kenzora vividly remembers when the news hit.
I can still remember, the newspapers with his photo coming out of the police station with his big puffy yellow winter coat and thinking, this is the guy? Like, this is the person who's responsible for all these things?
In the picture, Paul is surrounded by 4 police officers holding onto his arms. He's in handcuffs, gripping a plastic bag containing his belongings from the day he was arrested.
It's not what we imagine a serial killer will look like. He looked like someone I went to high school with, or, he looked like he could be a neighbor. So it was just so surprising that this was the person.
Having been officially arrested, it was time to prep Paul for the much-anticipated trial against him. Tony Bryant, another attorney who worked on Paul's defense team, says he was surprisingly compliant working with law enforcement.
He was very easy to deal with. He was always ready, willing, and able to answer any questions that we had. He would tell us what he had done and where he had gone, and if questions like that were ever asked. I recall, trying to get a sequence of events just with respect to the kidnapping of Leslie Mahaffey.
And when he was presented with logistical questions, he was cooperative.
They had some information which showed his cell phone being used in accessing different cell towers, going from essentially, may have been as far east as Scarborough, and along the highway towards Burlington, a distance of 50 kilometers or thereabouts. We were trying to get a sense of, who were you talking to when you were on the cell phone? Where were you going? And, what took you off the highway and that sort of thing. And of course, he was helpful in the preparation of his own testimony.
But there was one detail Paul kept close to his chest. He knew where the long-sought-after videotapes were hidden. The only person he trusted with the truth of their whereabouts was his lawyer, Ken Murray. Mary Garofalo says he told Ken exactly where the tapes were.
The tapes, those gruesome, disgusting tapes, were hidden in a light fixture in one of the rooms. You just have to watch a movie about drug deals and see how they're fictionalized to know that that's where the drug dealers always hide their stash, inside the light fixture.
And during the extensive search, it just happened to be the one place that was overlooked.
They supposedly went through this house with a fine-tooth comb, but they didn't check the light fixture.
You're probably asking yourself, if the police spent 71 days painstakingly searching every nook and cranny of Paul and Karla's house, how could they miss the ceilings? Well, search warrants are complicated, and the ones granted in this case were very specific. The police had to adhere to a charter of rights about necessary damage allowed to the property and limitations of rooms they were permitted to search. The police were only allowed to search areas of the home it was believed the girls were held captive. The tapes were hidden in the upstairs bathroom. The girls were limited to the basement. Upstairs was off limits. The courts justified the restrictions by saying that at the time of issuing the warrants, the only evidence they had on Paul was Karla's word, and to them, that just wasn't enough. On pages 211 and 212 of the investigation review provided by the Metro Toronto Police, they expressed just how tied their hands were. Quote, as one officer put it, the warrant was so strict it became unworkable. Another officer put it more directly, when he said that from time to time, it caused them to tear their hair. So now that Ken knew where the key evidence to convicting Paul was hidden, he was faced with a dilemma. His job was to do whatever it took to get his client the best outcome possible. He had to decide if that meant withholding evidence. And he made an ethically questionable decision. On May 6, 1993, Ken drove to Paul and Karla's home. He walked in with a briefcase and closed the door behind him.
He's the only one in the house. I'm going to go to the bathroom where Paul Bernardo told me these tapes are. And into the pothole light, reaches up, oh, there's a bag. Oh, look, these videotapes, puts them in his briefcase, walks out.
Ken Murray viewed them and didn't turn them over to the prosecution.
The lawyer kept those tapes for a year and a half, never turning them over to the police.
Ken Murray thought withholding the tapes from prosecution would benefit his defense strategy and ultimately Paul. Ken kept the tapes a secret for a year and a half, while Paul was awaiting trial and Karla was just beginning to serve her sentence at Kingston's Prison for Women. It became clear to Ken that if his decision came to light, he'd face legal consequences too. Tony says holding on to the tapes cost them both.
Because Ken Murray's decision was something that was going to be the subject of some litigation, he could no longer sort of represent himself and also represent Mr. Bernardo.
Ken Murray had to resign. Paul needed a new lawyer, someone with experience representing high-profile clients, because at this point, Paul Bernardo was Canada's most vilified man. Representing him was a tall order. Enter John Rosen. Like George and Ken, he looks like your typical polished lawyer too. He's been practicing criminal defense law in Canada for 50 years. He's risen to infamy for his ruthless approach representing the country's most notorious criminals. But despite his experience, he had his apprehensions about representing Paul. He was already inundated with work, and there wasn't much money in it for him. Here's John Rosen in his own words.
I spoke to my partner at the time, and we decided that we did not need another legally aided funded murder case because we had many on the go. And so I said no.
But when he found out about Ken keeping the tapes, he started to have a change of heart.
This lawyer called me back in a bit of a panic and said, speak to his junior associate. So I called them and she explained to me what sort of the behind the scenes of what was going on in the case. I was somewhat concerned.
John ultimately agreed to represent Paul, but he had some stipulations if he was going to take on the job.
I said yes on 3 conditions. The first was that the client had to agree because the client had no idea that these discussions were happening. The second was that the people who financed the case, legal aid, they had to agree to a change in counsel, having spent so much money with the previous counsel. And the third was that the trial judge had to agree to postpone the trial, which at that time was scheduled to commence shortly after Labor Day, about a month away. And I had no time to prepare.
The courts considered his conditions and agreed. John was now officially leading the charge of Paul's legal team, and their first order of business was dealing with the secret videotapes. Holding on to them any longer was only going to cause more trouble. So, John spoke to Paul, and this is how it went down.
So I went to the client and I said, I only have one choice. My choice is to turn them over. I'm ethically obliged. So you have 2 choices. You can give me instructions to do that, in which case I can stay as your lawyer, or you can tell me, no, don't do that, in which case I can't be your lawyer.
Together, John and Paul made the decision to hand over the long sought-after evidence to the police and prosecution.
So he instructed me to go ahead and do what I was supposed to do, and I turned them over to the authorities and continued on the case.
And there was no denying. They captured the devastating fates of Leslie and Kristen.
Everyone knew, of course, that you were listening to the last minutes in the lives of these young women.
The long-awaited moment had finally come. After nearly 2 years, the police finally had possession of the tapes. One after another, they popped them into their VCRs. And as they watched, each tape revealed everything Karla promised they would.
Each of them was a piece of real evidence.
The tapes were proof that Paul undeniably kidnapped and tortured Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey. But there was something else they showed. Here's Greg.
Once those tapes came forward, then Karla was seen in an entirely different light.
Karla wasn't the coerced woman she made herself out to be to her lawyers and the police. Megan says it stunned them.
They were very shocked to find out how compliant or how complicit Karla was, how active she was in these crimes and in these assaults. She wasn't a bystander. She was an active participant.
And John remembers eerie details that indicated she participated in the making of the tapes too.
The tape cassettes themselves had, in Karla's handwriting, things like Paul, Leslie, and me, with hearts and flower stickers on them, or me, Kristen, and Paul, or whatever, things like that.
Karla wasn't just coerced.
It was clear to the people that saw and heard the video that Karla was very much a willing participant and at time the main offender while Paul filmed.
The evidence was all there. Karla was Paul's co-pilot.
When you saw the videotapes, their tapes, their homemade tapes, you see how they were both in this together, agreeing to lure young girls to live out this sadistic fantasy.
What the police were watching went against everything they were made to believe.
They were sympathetic and thought she was a victim of Bernardo's.
But they were wrong. Amy Schlossberg and Megan Sachs, who co-host the podcast Women in Crime, say the timing of the tape circulation couldn't be more in Karla's favor.
Had the videotape surfaced earlier, the police would not have viewed Karla as the victim they saw her as. I think they did see her as a perpetrator and somewhat complicit. She's a female, too. He's a male. There's going to be a difference in treatment there.
But it was too late for Karla to be prosecuted further. And as the police and prosecution continued to watch the tapes in disbelief and horror, it became a matter of time before more shocking discoveries were overturned. On the last episode of Very Scary People, the Ken and Barbie killers, the Metro Toronto police began their painstaking search for the videotape evidence of Paul's crimes. As they searched, Karla worked out a plea deal for a reduced sentence for her involvement in the murders of Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey. The search for the tapes kept coming up short, but Paul knew exactly where they were, and his lawyer, Ken Murray, got to them before the police. 2.5 years later, the videotapes were finally turned over to the authorities. Now the court had everything they needed to charge Paul with murder. It's the night of May 18th, 1993, and Karla Homolka has just been arraigned on 2 counts of manslaughter for her involvement in the abductions and murders of Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey. She's tossing and turning in her jail cell at Kingston Prison for Women in Ontario. It's her first night of 10 years she'll be sleeping behind bars. The reality of her new future is setting in. This is the woman, once the girl, who dreamed of the good life, a rewarding career as a veterinarian, a loving marriage, and exciting experiences. Now, she's gone from living in a picture-perfect pink starter home to a life restricted by 4 walls of cold concrete in a maximum security prison. But the culture shock isn't the only thing stirring anxiety in Karla's head. She's playing out every detail she shared with the court in exchange for her plea deal.
She tells them about the 2 homicides, the Kristen and Leslie, and she doesn't tell them much else.
But there's something else weighing heavy on her mind. The conditions of her agreement.
The agreement was that if you don't tell the truth, if you don't tell us everything you know, then you'll be prosecuted for what we find out independently, and you may not even have a deal.
Karla's been keeping a secret she can't hold on to much longer. And she knows she has to come clean on everything. If she doesn't, she may be risking many more nights confined in prison.
So she thinks about what happened to her sister, which everybody at that point thinks is an accident. And she decides, I better come clean on that.
After the sleepless night in jail, the very next day, she approaches her lawyer, George Walker. What she reveals shocks them.
The one thing that she forgot to mention when she was talking to the police and confessing about the murders of Mahaffey and French, she just happened to forget that they had raped and murdered her own sister.
From ID, this is Very Scary People, the Ken and Barbie Killers. I'm your host, Donnie Wahlberg. You might remember me from our first season, the Amityville Murders. And now, in this season, we're traveling to Canada, a place known for its cold beer and warm welcomes, to trace the twisted path of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, a couple from Toronto that appeared loving and wholesome. The truth is, they were anything but. We'll explore how the boy and the girl next door became the killers known as Ken and Barbie. This is episode 6, Tammy Homolka. By September 1994, the Metro Toronto Police were finally in possession of the crucial evidence needed to try and convict Paul Bernardo.
But once those tapes came forward, then Karla was seen in an entirely different light. She was much more involved, so that just changed everything.
Not only did the tapes reveal to the police the true extent of Karla's participation in the abductions and murders of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, Kathy Kenzor says once the tapes were found, they eventually uncovered the truth about Tammy too.
There was videotape proving what had happened to her sister.
And that's what put the pressure on Karla. Because according to Wade Hemsworth, the tapes showed there was no denying Karla's involvement.
They were making videotapes of themselves having sex with Karla's sister.
She knew the tapes would eventually reveal the whole truth, and she didn't want Paul to be the one to tell the police first. For the first time in almost 2 years, everyone finally knew the truth. Here's what really happened to Tammy.
Tammy was Karla's little sister, a happy, loving little sister, the kind of little sister everyone would want to have.
At the time of her death, Tammy was 15 years old. She had blonde hair and a big smile, just like her 2 older sisters. She was just a week away from her 16th birthday. Her entire life was ahead of her. Tammy was a 10th grader at Sir Winston Churchill Secondary School in St. Catharines. She was quite the athlete. Soccer was her favorite. Tammy, her sisters, and her parents spent a lot of time together. One of their favorite things to do as a family was hang out by their backyard pool in the summer. Once Karla and Paul got together, and he was brought into the fold, Tammy and Paul got to know each other.
At a certain point, when Karla is dating Paul and he's staying there all the time or eventually moving in, he's around a lot as well.
But things started to get weird, real fast. And Amy Schlossberg says Tammy was at the center of it.
Paul had an unhealthy infatuation with Karla's younger sister, Tammy Homolka.
Eventually, Paul's obsession grew larger than anyone could have imagined. Not long after he moved in with the Homolkas, he shared some inappropriate fantasies with Karla.
And he is, according to Karla Homolka, harassing her to have sex with her little sister. And she's saying, no, I don't want you to.
But he wouldn't drop it or take no for an answer.
He wore on her slowly. And Paul wanted what Paul wanted. And he was manipulative. And he knew how to get Karla to agree.
We knew at this point in their relationship, he was already violent with her and could easily manipulate her into just about anything out of fear. Paul was especially fixated on Tammy's virginity.
Now, Tammy was a virgin, and that was very appealing to Paul, who often criticized Karla for not being pure.
And Paul began to convince Karla that it would be a gift to him to have Tammy's virginity, and that was important since she could not give that to him. And eventually, she did agree.
So Karla wanted to make him happy, and Karla had decided that as a Christmas present to Paul, Karla was going to give Paul her baby sister Tammy's virginity as a Christmas present.
Here's Jim Van Allen, a retired FBI profiler who worked on Paul's case.
The decision to gift Tammy Homolka's virginity to Paul Bernardo as a Christmas present shows a high level of compliance to wanting to keep him happy, and part of the manipulation on his part that she was not a virgin, she would never be a virgin for him, and that he made very important to her. So he imposed this wish on her for his benefit to try and get her to comply.
Now that Karla had been convinced, she and Paul began planning to fulfill his sick wish.
They concocted a plan whereby they could do it non-violently through drugging.
While she's unconscious, and Paul Bernardo and Karla will videotape the whole thing so they can watch it later. It's a night before Christmas Eve, so it's December 23rd.
The Homolkas had a small group of close friends and family over for an intimate Christmas party. In the home videos Paul took at the party, you can see their home was festively decorated. In the living room, there was a glimmering tree with perfectly wrapped presents at the base of it. It appeared like a normal, cheerful Christmas celebration. But behind the scenes, Karla and Paul were enacting their dark plan. Before they could follow through on their plan, Karla had one thing to do.
Karla worked as a veterinary tech.
And she obtained some halothane, which is an anesthetic used in animal medical care and a veterinary clinic where Karla had worked. She was able to steal some of that material and bring it home.
And then, the night of the Christmas party.
They drank some spiked eggnog, and they seemed to be having a good time.
And Karla slipped halothane into Tammy's drink. So Tammy was getting extremely inebriated with the effect of drugs and alcohol.
Not only did Karla agree to videotape the assault of her younger sister, she provided the drugs to make it possible, too. While Tammy appeared outwardly intoxicated, her parents, Dorothy and Carl, assumed she would just sleep it off. When the party was over, Dorothy, Carl, and the middle sister, Lori, went to bed in their rooms. Tammy was still awake and agreed to join Paul and Karla in their basement bedroom, thinking they would end the night watching a movie together. Once the three of them made it down into the basement, Paul and Karla were able to begin carrying out the next phase of their plan.
Karla held down her own sister with the sedative on a towel on her face because they were afraid that she would wake up during the assault.
She was so concerned that Tammy would wake up that she doubled down.
Karla put more halothane on a rag and put it over Tammy's face to cause further sedation.
That's when the sexual violence began. And Paul wasn't the only perpetrator.
So when Tammy became unconscious, then they started assaulting her, both Karla and Paul.
And while she was in this deep sleep, he raped her. She raped her. They videotaped her.
Paul and Karla continued to mercilessly attack Tammy until they were confronted with the unexpected.
Tammy started coughing and vomiting. They decided to stop the assault at that point.
They then put her down somewhere where she proceeded to vomit and choke on her vomit, and she died. They realized she was dead.
But then they took some precautions to cover their tracks.
They then removed all of her clothes, changed her clothing, cleaned her up, and put her in bed, and made it look as if she had died of natural causes during the evening.
They called 911, and when first responders arrived on the scene,
Unfortunately, it was too late.
she was presumed dead on arrival. And by the time they took her to the hospital, the worst-case scenario was confirmed. Tammy Homolka died December 24th, 1990, just a week before her 16th birthday, at the hands of Paul Bernardo and her sister.
Coroner's office deemed it a natural death because they did find vomit in her system, but they had no idea that she had been drugged.
After Tammy's death was ruled accidental, Paul and Karla had seemingly got away with their horrific crimes. Publicly, they acted strange in the aftermath of her death, planning their wedding, arguing with Karla's parents about paying for it, telling friends how it felt unfair Tammy's funeral would overshadow their big day. Privately, they acted strange too.
I don't know that they caused her death deliberately. They certainly caused it selfishly and carelessly and treated it cavalierly afterward.
They proceeded to go on with their lives after an earth-shattering tragedy. When the tapes came to light, police saw that not long after Tammy's death, they continued enacting deranged fantasies involving Tammy. Paul Hunter saw the tapes and remembers them vividly.
Shortly after Tammy dies, parents go off to get away from it all, leaving the home in control of Karla and her nice, fiance, Paul. So we're sitting there one day in the court, and they play this to us. This is one of their sex videos they were making. This is on the spot where Tammy died. She's just been buried. Paul's lying there naked. Karla walks in with a long-stemmed rose and drapes it down his body.
What came next on the home video got even more twisted.
And she says, "We'll take this to Tammy's grave, and we'll put it on her grave. And I've got something else for you," she says. And she walks off screen. Cut, walks back on screen. Cut, making a movie. Cut, this is for their fun and thrill. And she has a pair of Tammy's panties, and she drags them down his body. And then she says, "Let's go upstairs." Cut. They walk into Tammy's bedroom. Karla's now dressed in Tammy's schoolgirl outfit. Bernardo is still naked, and she starts doing things to Bernardo, while Bernardo is holding up an 8x10 picture of Tammy, staring at it while Karla's having her way with him.
What Paul Hunter saw on that home video made something very clear. Karla had changed her tune about her husband's obsession with Tammy. Even after Tammy died, she continued to accept and support his fantasy. This was her little sister.
It is one of the parts of the case that I think is still hard to understand. Why Karla Homolka ever got to the point where she agreed to let Paul Bernardo assault her little sister. Why she felt that was okay. There's been speculation that she did it out of jealousy, that Paul was obsessed with her and she wanted to get her sister back for it. Again, speculation, who knows? Regardless, there is no explanation. There is no rational explanation, but your mind wants to try to find one as to why she would allow him to do that to her little sister.
But it was an inevitable reality. With Karla's confession came a circumstance no family would ever think they'd be in.
She was terrified that her family would find out that it was her fault that her sister had died.
Law enforcement still needed to confirm Karla's story. Here's Jim again.
They videotaped the drugging and sexual assault of Tammy Homolka.
But there was no visual evidence of Tammy's death.
Not a lot of the dying sequence is on the video, but we rely on other sources of information for that.
The coroners were called upon to assist in confirming the true cause of Tammy's death. Kathy remembers what they found.
Tammy's body was exhumed, and they discovered that she had actually died after being drugged.
It took exhuming Tammy's remains to discover how she really died. But it's hard not to think that had Tammy's death been more thoroughly investigated, Paul and Karla would have been sentenced to prison, potentially stopping them from committing more horrific attacks, and maybe Leslie and Kristen could have still been alive today. When Tammy was exhumed, the real nature of her death wasn't the only thing the coroners discovered. Paul and Karla left something for Tammy when she was laid to rest at Victoria Lawn Cemetery.
Paul and Karla put a letter each in her coffin that they assumed no one would ever read, but because she was exhumed, people read the letter.
While covering Paul's trial, Kathy heard the letter read out loud.
It's not like it's a confession, but it's eerie to hear or listen to the words when, it was read out what was in the letter about, being sorry for what had happened, and Paul Bernardo saying, I failed you, and that kind of stuff.
After Tammy was exhumed, and further investigation into the cause of her death was confirmed, on top of Karla's confession, Paul was in even more trouble than before. Here's John Rosen, Paul's lawyer.
So because of her revelation, Paul gets another charge added on, which is Tammy Homolka.
But Karla participated in Tammy's death too. And although Karla had already struck her plea deal in the murders of Leslie and Kristen, she now faced further consequences.
And they decide, because they bought her as a witness, that they're going to keep her. And they just increase the price. And the price is she'll plead to the manslaughter on Tammy, and she'll get an extra 2 years. So her global sentence will be 12. 5 plus 5 plus 2.
You heard that right. Only 2 extra years for drugging, sexually assaulting, and ultimately killing her own sister. But again, all the courts and the police had on her when they finalized Karla's deal was her word. The videotape evidence had yet to be found. Had the tape surfaced sooner, Mary believes Karla's fate would have been very different.
Had they been able to see the true involvement of Karla Homolka in these heinous crimes, they would never have given her a 12-year deal. And so, again, just another of a laundry list of mistakes that was made by law enforcement in this case.
Missteps or not, that July, Karla's case was closed. There was no going back on the deal. 12 years and Karla would be free to live life, for the most part as she did before. And Amy says that, in and of itself, caused a nationwide stir.
I think that's what horrified the public the most, is that this emerged, but it was too late. Karla couldn't be held more culpable than she already had been.
Karla Homolka got her day in court, but Paul was still awaiting his, and the evidence was clear. Paul, with Karla as his co-conspirator, sexually assaulted Tammy and kidnapped and abused Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. But there's one thing the tapes didn't show.
They weren't snuff films. The homicides themselves, the actual killing was not captured on the video. But everyone knew, of course, that you were listening to the last minutes in the lives of these young women.
So the question remained.
Because the videos did not show the actual killing, the question was still left open as to who did it.
It was Karla's word against Paul's, and up to the court to decide. Previously, on Very Scary People, the Ken and Barbie killers. While Karla was sitting in jail for her involvement in the murders of Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey, she decided to come clean about something else. Her little sister, Tammy. She revealed her and Paul plotted to drug and sexually assault Tammy at their family Christmas party. After the startling confession, only 2 more years were added to Karla's sentence. But Paul faced an additional murder charge. It's the morning of May 18th, 1995, the first day of Paul Bernardo's long-anticipated trial. Droves of people are lining up around the multi-level concrete courthouse on University Avenue in Toronto, Ontario.
People would line up often overnight with their sleeping bags or with their lawn chairs and wait in line so that they could get a spot inside.
The crowd outside the courthouse is incredibly diverse, certainly reflective of the country's biggest city, but it wasn't limited to locals.
There was all different age groups, all different nationalities. There was Americans coming over to watch the trial as well. Like, it was a worldwide event.
Everyone's hoping to catch a glimpse of Canada's infamous criminal duo.
It's like, I want to see the face of evil. I want to see Bonnie and Clyde.
And because it was a public trial, some of them would get their chance.
It was so bad that there was a ticket system. You had to line up and get it. You couldn't get in unless you had a ticket.
Every national media outlet was there too. Press from national stations like CBC and CTV and smaller local stations alike were interspersed into the crowd of hopeful spectators. They had their branded microphones held up to their faces and cameras lugged over their shoulders.
We don't have cameras in the courtroom. So they set up on the opposite side of the street facing the entrance to the courthouse a two-layered structure that allowed all the media outlets to have essentially an office on scene.
It was an unprecedented spectacle, but nobody could seem to look away.
There was a weird cartoonishness to it at the same time as the horror of it all.
It became a bit of a circus in a weird way, but Canadians just were gripped that summer by the horror of what these two people had done.
But there was one thing spectators were holding their breath for: the videotapes. Playing the gruesome tapes in court sparked controversy.
Families and others didn't want the tapes played in court at all.
But without them, a fair conviction could be jeopardized.
We needed to see the perpetrators brought to justice, and they were the vehicle that made sure that everybody understood very clearly what had happened.
And after careful consideration, it was decided that the infamous videotapes would be played.
It's just the sick details and the fact that it's on video. Like, even a movie producer couldn't have possibly created the kinds of things he did to these girls.
And the battle for the last word between Karla and Paul intensified.
The experience of Karla's testimony was one of the most anticipated by anyone who was observing this trial.
4 months would go by as each side presented their arguments, called expert witnesses, and cross-examined Karla and Paul in pursuit of the true story behind the murders of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. It dominated the Canadian news cycle.
This case has become the most legally complicated story in Canadian history, and it gets stranger all the time.
And for the first time, they'd hear from the man who sparked nationwide horror.
The trial reached the height of its drama when Bernardo took the stand in his own defense.
From ID, this is Very Scary People, the Ken and Barbie Killers. I'm your host, Donnie Wahlberg. You might remember me from our first season, the Amityville Murders. And now, in this season, we're traveling to Canada, a place known for its cold beer and warm welcomes, to trace the twisted path of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, a couple from Toronto that appeared loving and wholesome. The truth is, they were anything but. We'll explore how the boy and the girl next door became the killers known as Ken and Barbie. This is episode 7, Ken versus Barbie. On the first day of the trial, Chief Justice Patrick Lesage was sitting at the judge's bench, presiding over the 600-seat, wood-paneled courtroom. Soon, he wouldn't be the only person in the room.
It was a packed courtroom. There was nervous tension.
One by one, onlookers entered the courtroom and sat down. And to the right of the judge was the jury bench. 1,000 people volunteered to take on the case, but in the end, only 12 people were chosen, 4 women and 8 men. And scattered throughout the courtroom crowd were the victims' families. It was the first time the Frenches, the Mahafis, and the Homolkas were in the same room. Wade Hemsworth was in the courtroom reporting for the Hamilton Spectator. Like many of the journalists there, he'd been following the case for years.
Sitting where we were in such proximity to the families of the people who were directly impacted, who lost the greatest treasures of their lives at the worst time, they were sitting right in front of us. I could have tapped them on the shoulder. That's how close they were. All of them were remarkably dignified through something that no parent should ever have to face. They returned to court every day.
In those initial days, everyone knew they were buckling in for a journey that would reveal painful truths. And it wasn't just the families of the murdered girls either, but another group of women Paul terrorized too.
The victims of the Scarborough rapist filled 2 rows of seats in the front of the court.
Their presence at the trial was significant. It was a testament to both their strength and their solidarity with Kristen, Leslie, and Tammy. They were dedicated to seeing justice fulfilled. 12 days into the trial, reality would sink in even deeper when the videotapes were called into question. Playing the tapes in the courtroom was a tough call for Justice Lesage.
After hearing arguments about whether the deceased girls had constitutional rights or did they die when they died and did they carry over to the families, the judge had to make a decision.
That's John Rosen, Paul's defense lawyer. Lesage ultimately ruled that only the jury, the lawyers, and Paul himself could watch the videos.
The screens on the videos that the public could see would be blackened, turned off, only when a victim was shown.
The victims' families, the media, and the public were limited to only the audio.
So they were on these loudspeakers in the courtroom.
Less than 2 weeks into the trial, the first tape was played. This was a huge moment for the court. It took nearly 2 years of tireless searching for these tapes, and now they'd finally be made public record.
They were usually played 3 times.
It seemed egregious, but each time served a purpose.
The first time they would just play it and we would listen. The second time the jury was given transcripts to read while they were listening. The third time there was a police officer on the stand one of the investigators who would walk the jury through it and say, okay, pause there. You see there? That's the cord that was used to strangle Kristen. See over there, there's the halothane. Or you see there's a bruise on her here.
Tony Bryant, who worked on Paul's defense team, was among those who heard the tapes. He says the audio alone made its mark.
Everyone knew, of course, that you were listening to the last minutes in the lives of these young women. That's just difficult to do. I don't care who you are.
One by one, each tape revealed the terrifying details of what Kristen and Leslie endured while held captive by Paul. Joy Malbaum was in the courtroom too. She remembers and has never forgotten the specific evidence they contained.
We heard young girls being raped, hit, abused, tortured, yelled at, sodomized, on their knees, crying out for their brothers, crying out for their parents. And Kristen fought back. This was a memory of mine because it was part of the story that day when we learned that she decided to fight back with Paul Bernardo, and her words were, "Some things are worth dying for." This is from a 15-year-old child who knows she's going to die because she knew, because they showed her tapes of Leslie Mahaffey being tortured.
And as details from the videos made their way to the public, people outside the courthouse were calling for Paul's punishment.
Kill him. Kill him. You should get rid of him. Kill him. Public hanging. String him up.
But inside the courtroom, the girls' families were silently suffering alongside everyone else. The Homolkas often chose to stay, but
at times plugging their ears to block out the sounds of the graphic videotapes.
some of the families couldn't bear being in the room.
When the Crown would say, "We're going to now play this tape," all the families would stand up and walk out.
But there was one especially unforgettable day. Debbie Mahaffey came into the courtroom while audio of her daughter was playing. With a victim support service staff by her side, she stood there and listened. Joy and Kathy saw her that day.
And I remember seeing Debbie Mahaffey, and she's crying, wailing, because she's hearing her daughter for the first time since she was kidnapped and then found dead.
And what happened next was unforgettable.
They got to the worst part of the tape, which is when Paul Bernardo is being incredibly violent with Leslie. And she's crying and she's begging him to let her go. She's crying, asking to see her little brother, asking to see her mom. She wants to see her friends. And you can hear in her voice that just how scared she is. And right at that moment, she let out this cry and this howl that it was just pure agony, that she couldn't do anything to help her daughter. And she was listening to her in her final moments.
After 20 days of tediously poring over the videotape evidence, the prosecution was confident not a single detail, however excruciating they may have been, was looked over. But the videos ultimately couldn't determine the most important question of the trial.
Because the videos did not show the actual killing, the question was still left open as to who did it.
On June 19th, 1 month after the trial began, it was finally time for Karla to testify against Paul. The first day of her testimony, the courthouse was buzzing. The energy was palpable.
On the day Karla testified against her then ex-husband, man, oh man, there was a lineup down the block outside the courthouse.
That day, Karla walked through the courthouse and up onto the witness stand.
She was so small that no one could see her. So everyone was standing up, and the judge got mad and told everyone to sit down. And there was just so much anticipation.
The woman everyone had built up in their minds for so long was so different than they imagined.
The pictures we'd seen of her in the media weren't really representative of what she looked like. She was just a petite, pretty young woman.
But her face, expressionless. Her demeanor, almost robotic. After the initial shock of her appearance, it was time to get down to business.
She spent several days with the Crown going through her relationship with Paul Bernardo, what happened with Leslie, what happened with Kristen.
As she recounted the violence the two girls endured while she and Paul held them captive, Karla was noticeably unemotional. Joy remembers it well.
I'm just looking at Karla as she's just reading matter-of-factly how they kidnap and rape and torture these girls and how they're killed, like reading a laundry list, and making sure that, we all know that, she made the effort to comfort one of the girls by giving her a teddy bear.
It was all really unsettling. Her monotone presentation was similar to the initial interview confessing to the Crown as part of her plea deal. Here's Karla in that interview.
He went over to her and he strangled her more. And I think I watched that time, because what the hell, she's dead anyway.
In court, when the Crown pivoted to questions about Kristen, Karla's tone was a bit different. She actually cried.
She, felt really bad about Kristen because she figured they were friends because they had spent so much quality time together.
Let's backtrack for a moment here. Karla helped Paul lure Kristen into their car in the parking lot of Grace Lutheran Church.
From, all accounts, Karla Homolka was in the passenger seat and called Kristen French over and said, hey, we need help with directions. Can you help with directions? So Kristen came over, Karla got out and put the map on the hood of the car.
Then they shoved Kristen in the car and held her captive, torturing her for 3 days before killing her. That's the quality time Karla was referring to. Karla made a similar point and alluded to the time she spent with Kristen in the plea deal interviews too. Here's Karla in her own words. It's all on tape in a 1997 special put out by the Fifth Estate.
I never should have gotten to know Kristen because you get emotionally involved with these people and it really hurts. It hurts a lot more because I felt like I was friends with both of them, especially Kristen, because we did so much stuff together. We put makeup on together. We talked, just girl talk when Paul was gone getting us food. And it just made it hurt even more.
But despite her claims about having a connection to the victims, in the same interview, she also admitted her complicity in Kristen's death.
He wanted to keep her for longer, and I didn't want to. I was going to work. I didn't want to go to work knowing that this girl was in my house and she could escape so easily, and I was afraid. So I didn't suggest to him that we kill her on Sunday, but I knew that she had to be gone.
In court, Karla's story didn't waver from her initial meetings with the Crown when she struck her deal. She was still claiming to be a battered wife in a tumultuous relationship, and she too was a victim of Paul's, and that she was an unwilling participant in the murders of Kristen and Leslie. It was only out of fear for her own life that she cooperated with Paul.
She always went back to the fact that she was afraid.
The prosecution continually circulated the image of Karla with the deep black eyes from the time when she was sent to the hospital after the couple's final domestic dispute. And because the tapes never revealed who exactly enacted the killing, Karla made sure to be especially specific with those details.
Her feet were tied with that electrical cord that he had used to kill Leslie, and then he strangled her after he was done.
After 5 days of well-prepared testimony, Karla's side of the story had been exhausted, but her claims were yet to be tested by Paul's defense. Karla's time on the stand was far from over. It was time for the cross-examination. The cross-examination started off with a bang.
His opening was one of the most dramatic things I've ever seen in court. He had a folder in his hand, and he's wearing his lawyer's robes, and he came out from behind his lawyer's table like something that had been released from a cage.
Over the course of her testimony, John Rosen had been eagerly awaiting his moment to approach Karla on the stand.
And she would pop herself up onto the stool in the witness box like I think the way that she thought a gentlewoman would do. And this facade was something that John Rosen was so eager to break as quickly as possible.
People in the crowd were excited to watch his questioning too. To this day, John has a reputation in Canada for his bulldog approach.
Everyone was waiting to see what he would get out of her, to see what she would say, to see if she would break down.
And John certainly pulled out all the stops.
He pretty well ran right up to get right in her face. And I mean, they, I'm sure, could smell one another's breath like that. They were that close.
Here's John recounting the opening moment in his own words.
I said, "Who's this a picture of?" She said, "That's my sister, Tammy." I said, "Right. And this is a picture of Tammy in her coffin after they exhumed her, because you and him put her there, didn't you? And she was pretty shaken, actually. And she said, yes. And then I said, and who is this a picture of? This is Leslie Mahaffey, isn't it? She said, yes. And I said, and these are the cement blocks with the parts of her body in it that you and him put there. Isn't that right, Karla? And then I went to the third one, and I said, who is this? He said, that's Kristen French, isn't it? In her school uniform that she was wearing the day you kidnapped her. And then this is her on a gurney, naked, scoured, no forensics, because you did that.
Despite John's intense, intimidating approach, Karla didn't break.
She was shaken, and she was visibly upset, but she remained a pretty steadfast witness and stuck to her story through his long cross-examination of her.
But the way Karla held it together was seemingly playing into the defense's strategy.
As she survived each day of cross, she got a little bit stronger. Now, I was worried about that at the time, but I think it also helped me because it showed the jury that she was no snowflake that could be blown away in the wind.
In her cross-examination, Karla was unknowingly revealing her independent and hard-headed qualities, conflicting with the image she had so carefully crafted of an easily manipulated, meek woman.
She did have an inner core of iron, and it came out, and she could make her own decisions. And when she decided, when he would go out for food and she was left guarding one of the girls, she didn't do anything about it. And her claims of being afraid and all that just fell on deaf ears.
Her reaction, or lack thereof, emboldened their tactic to expose Karla as a willful participant in hopes of reducing Paul's charges. After 21 days of testimony and fiery cross-examination, Karla's time on the stand was up.
It wasn't until the last minute that John Rosen stood up and said he would elect to call Paul Bernardo to the stand.
And it was time for Paul to face his consequences in front of some of the people he hurt the most. He was wearing a black suit and a white collared shirt and dress shoes when he approached the court.
Paul Bernardo stood up and he, confidently walked past the jury, looked at all of them, made eye contact with them, acted like he was going on a job interview or something, was very confident and sure of himself. He actually stood for the first day and looked directly at the jury with every answer.
Just like Karla, Paul stuck to his story, that Karla was the one who killed Leslie and Kristen.
He started off by saying to the jury, I know I've done a lot of terrible things, but I did not kill these girls. And he looked right at them. He gestured with his hands. He was like a salesman, like just really working the room.
Bernardo's whole defense was simple. He admits he's a very bad guy. He acknowledges the Scarborough rapes. He acknowledges he's a kidnapper and a rapist, but he's not a killer, says Bernardo. She's the killer.
In Paul's recollection, the girls died by different circumstances than Karla had told the court.
According to him, Leslie was suffocated by Karla Homolka with a pillow, which Karla Homolka denied, and that Kristen died accidentally by strangling herself because she had been tied with a cord around her neck to a hope chest, and that she was struggling to get free, and she strangled herself by accident.
After Paul recounted the events as he remembered them, John questioned him further. John asked about Tammy.
So everybody expected me to go through his life history and all that sort of thing, and I just got him up there and I said, okay, Paul, look, did you and Karla, uptunned Tammy and sexually molest her and all that sort of thing? He said, yes, we did. Okay, so let's get that off the table. All right, let's talk about Leslie. Tell me did you do this? No, I didn't kill her. This is what happened. This is how it happened. What about Kristen? No, I didn't kill her. This is what happened. This is how it happened. Okay. Thank you. Sat down. Less than 30 minutes.
Paul's testimony may have been too little, too late. At that point, the general consensus was that everybody who had been invested in the trial had their minds made up.
The problem that I think I had is that the tapes were just impossible to get over. Even though they did not show the homicides, just the participation and the domination of these two poor innocent girls was just horrendous.
He would be lucky if he got away with a long prison term instead of his whole life. And that was all predicated on his word against her word. You know, Ken versus Barbie.
In his closing argument, John Rosen admitted Paul kidnapped, raped, and confined Leslie and Kristen, but maintained there was no proof he murdered them. He emphasized that Karla's testimony was not credible enough to convict him of murder. Prosecution closed their argument, telling jurors that even if they don't believe Karla, they should still convict Bernardo of murder because the videotapes provided enough proof that he killed the girls. After each side rested their case, the jury was finally dismissed to reach a verdict.
Justice Patrick Lesage told the 8-man, 4-women panel to consider all of the evidence in the murders of Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey before they reach a decision. That evidence includes 52 days of testimony, 87 witnesses, and several graphic videotapes.
The jury went out for deliberations early in the afternoon on the first day, and the reporters, we just all are hanging around in the hallway waiting, hoping that, it's going to be quick because we think it's an open and shut case.
The members of the court, the families of the victims, and the entire country waited with bated breath for the final decision.
In your heart, you knew he was guilty and you knew he was going to be found guilty, but you just needed to hear the words.
But everyone would have to wait.
The jurors deliberated just for a few hours, and then they retired for the evening. We all came back at 9 the next morning. They started their deliberations again, and before noon, they came back with their verdict.
Collectively, it took only 8 hours for the jurors to reach their final decision.
The verdict was guilty.
And on the outside, reporters were ready to break the news.
Let me just tell you what it was like in that courtroom just moments ago. It was a packed courtroom. There was nervous tension. When Bernardo came into the courtroom, the courtroom just went dead silent. When the jury walked in, it got even quieter. And then the justice asked if they had reached their verdict, and he did. And he went through the counts 1, 2, which are first-degree murder, guilty, 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 all the way down. Guilty of first-degree murder of Leslie Mahaffey. Guilty of first-degree murder of Kristen French. Guilty of aggravated sexual assault of Leslie and Kristen. Guilty of kidnapping the schoolgirls. Guilty of forcible confinement of Leslie and Kristen. And guilty of performing an indignity to a human body.
He was sentenced to life imprisonment with no eligibility for parole until 25 years had passed.
His fate was sealed, and it appeared he felt nothing.
Bernardo stood, as he has throughout this trial, cold and stone-faced, showing no emotion as he was sentenced to 2 automatic life sentences.
But the courtroom immediately erupted with emotional intensity.
So as soon as we heard the words that he was guilty, it was absolute mayhem outside the courthouse, with people excited and happy.
Some even ran behind the paddy wagon transporting Paul to prison.
People jeer Paul Bernardo, now a convicted murderer.
There was a huge scrum of reporters, everyone trying to hear from everybody.
They especially wanted to hear from the Mahaffeys and the Frenches. With dozens of reporter microphones in their faces, the families read statements on the steps of the courthouse. Leslie's dad, Dan, stood by her little brother Ryan as he spoke.
We feel it would be inappropriate and impossible to speak how we feel at this moment. The intensity of the overwhelming pain and strong emotion have once again swept us and rendering it impossible for us to adequately talk about the verdict, the death of Leslie, and what this moment really means to us.
While the verdict gave Dan finality, it couldn't give him back what was most important.
Only the trial is over. Leslie is still not coming home.
Kristen's dad, Doug, was wearing a green sweater in the same hue as the ribbons worn in honor of Kristen when she disappeared. He addressed the press on behalf of the French family.
Today, with the guilty verdict, especially the guilty verdict for first-degree murder of our daughter, there is some sort of closure. Well, it can't return our daughter to us. We have the satisfaction of seeing this perpetrator punished.
Kristen's mom, Donna, was by his side when he shared one last message to their daughter.
Finally, and as always, our final words for our daughter. With the trial over, Christy, you can't be hurt anymore. We love you.
Then they shared a tight, emotional embrace as tears ran down their faces. After the trial, the Homolkas darted to their car when a reporter followed them.
You feel that your daughter was vindicated in the jury's decision?
Yes, she was.
And that's all they said. Beyond the families so directly impacted by Paul and Karla's senseless violence, a sigh of collective relief was felt by all who had spent their summer glued to the trial. If you're asking yourself, what happened to Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka after the trial? And where are they now? Rest assured, you're not alone. Karla Homolka served all 12 years of her controversial sentence.
Right to the last minute, amidst, outcry from all of Canada.
Over a decade had passed, but Canada never forgave or forgot.
People were so angry that she got what they called a deal with the devil.
She was released from Saint-Anne-de-Plaine prison in Quebec on July 4th, 2005, under 9 conditions. Here are a few that stood out. She had to inform the police of where she lived, where she worked, and who she lived with. Should she choose to change her name, she needed to disclose it to them. She could not contact Paul Bernardo, the families of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, or anyone with a history of violent criminal behavior. She could not associate with people under the age of 16. Karla complied with all conditions and promptly resumed a seemingly regular life on the outside, but she did not return to Toronto. And the conditions of her release were removed just 4 months after they were put in place. She even started a family.
She got married to her lawyer's brother, and they had children together.
And briefly moved to a French island in the southern Caribbean. But back in Canada, to this day, Karla is a pariah.
Every once in a while, when someone spots her doing something, either with her kid's school or doing something in the community, there'll be a bit of a backlash. Maybe pictures will be sent to the media and people get angry, but there's nothing they can do. There's nothing they can do. She has served her sentence and she is now out in the community.
And she maintains her story, that she was manipulated into her involvement in the deaths of Kristen, Leslie, and Tammy.
She has never apologized. She has never shown remorse. She has never taken ownership of her crimes.
Paul began his life sentence at Kingston's Penitentiary in Ontario. He was classified as a dangerous offender and kept in segregation.
Paul Bernardo is kept in solitary confinement in a special wing of the prison. Pretty much 24 hours a day, maybe 23 hours a day, he's in this tiny 10 by 10 cell by himself.
As soon as he got there, Paul had his eyes on parole and began doing everything he could to one day be released.
In anticipation of those 25 years coming through from the date of his arrest, which would have been in 2017, he was taking whatever treatment programs were available to him in the penitentiary. He was trying to obtain assessments that showed that the 25 years had accomplished something in terms of treatment.
But his parole was denied. It's been said he makes pathetic reaches for pity.
He cries a lot. I read that he cries a lot in jail. The sadistic killer thinks that he is the victim.
At Paul's parole hearing in 2017, he requested to be removed from solitary confinement.
That he be put on a more general wing of the jail with the general population because he cannot stand to live this way any longer.
His request was denied. But 6 years later, this past June, he was transferred from maximum security to a minimum security prison in Quebec. The decision to move him has been the subject of public outcry. But there are no plans to release Paul from his indefinite sentence. After the trial, Paul and Karla's pink house on Bayview Drive, where they tortured Leslie and Kristen, was boarded up and defaced with graffiti messages that read, "Rotten Hell, Paul Bernardo."
Neighbors say that almost nightly, rocks are thrown at the House of Horrors. They want it torn down.
The neighbors got their wish.
They knocked down the house as a way of kind of closing the book. They destroyed the place where all of this happened, not to destroy the memories, but to destroy the place, to destroy this place where sadistic, dark, awful, unspeakable crimes happened for the fun and pleasure of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka.
The infamous, horrific videotape evidence was destroyed.
No one will see those awful images again. No one will hear those awful sounds again.
Locking them away in an evidence archive was not a viable option to them. It posed too much of a possibility, even if slim, that they could one day be unearthed again. And speaking of locking them away, remember Paul's first lawyer, Ken Murray, who hid the tapes from the Crown? In 2000, he was ultimately cleared of obstruction of justice for withholding them. While so much of the violent saga has been destroyed, Canada and those affected have been permanently altered.
I've often wondered, what are the lessons of all of this? What do we take away as a society or as individuals from the whole episode?
St. Catharines, especially, has never been the same.
Our hometown, St. Catharines, wasn't a safe place anymore. They just didn't take from the families, they took from the whole community.
And of course, the Mahaffey and French families are forever living with a void that can never be filled.
The memories of those young women are held both specifically and generally in ways that are positive, that they are remembered as people of potential, as kind people, as people who were important to their families and friends and enhanced their lives, but never got to live their own lives into adulthood. And we never got to know what they would be like as mothers, what contributions to the world they might have made, which could have been great.
And although rife with complexity, Tammy's memory lives on too.
We'll never know who she might have become and what she might have done, because those possibilities were taken away for nothing of value at all, the opposite of value. They were wasted.
And the Homolkas have had to face navigating a web of difficult reckonings and emotions.
Her parents were in such an awful and complicated position. It's not easy to say that the family of somebody who was responsible for killing 3 people needs to be in our thoughts, but they do.
Ultimately, Dorothy, Carl, and Lori lost family too.
They lost their daughter. They lost both daughters in some ways. And I think they really wanted to believe Karla. I think they really wanted to save the daughter that still was there. And, I think they placed blame on Paul Bernardo, and some of that blame was appropriate. But yeah, certainly they're no monsters. They're victims in this too. losing a child is one of the worst things you can experience, but to learn, that it was your other child who murdered her sister, and then for the whole world to be in on this and witnessing your worst pain, your worst moment, your worst family nightmare, it's so exacerbated, and I certainly feel for them too.
Time has been taken to reflect on what could be learned from every aspect of the story.
Nothing can ever make up for what happened. But for nothing positive to have happened that would make this less likely to happen again in the future would be tragedy upon tragedy.
Some people believe there were important takeaways from the case, and change has been effected where missteps in the investigation were identified.
Some procedures and technology have changed in policing and investigation that help police to collaborate with one another, to share information more readily, especially when it crosses jurisdictional boundaries, as these crimes did.
And there's been time to reflect on the role Karla's privileges played in her lenient plea deal.
I have to wonder how much the fact that she was a white middle-class woman plays into her sentence and the outcome in this case, because I don't think we could ignore the fact that she was in a privileged situation, and perhaps had she been a different race, different class, even a different gender, how things may have been different for her.
As the story ends, it comes with the age-old reminder to never judge a book by its cover.
They look like us, Paul and Karla. So what is the difference between them and us, other than they're insane and that they're sociopaths? But you don't see that in a person.
Evil walks among us. I mean, it lives next door. It's got blonde hair and blue eyes, and it's cute as a bug, and it can charm the pants off your parents.
Down the twisted path of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed couple, we've come to find that just like Ken and Barbie, evil too can come in a shiny package.
If that's the lesson, what do you do about that other than hope that you don't cross paths with people like these two, ever?
Very Scary People, The Ken and Barbie Killers, is hosted by me, Donnie Wahlberg. It's a production of ID in collaboration with Neon Hum Media and is based on an original series created by CNN executive producer Nancy Duffy. At CNN, our senior producer is Sabina Ryman. Our producer is Allison O'Brien, and our associate producer is Michael Reyes. From ID, our executive producer is Jessica Lowther. From Neon Hum Media, our executive producer is Jonathan Hirsch. Cooper Mall is our producer, and our associate producer is Zoe Culkin. Our editor is Stephanie Serrano. Samantha Allison is our production manager. Our fact checker is Catherine Newham. Josh Hahn is our mix engineer. Theme and original music composed by Asha Ivanovich.